You made it, folks, to another morning. It's the second day of February. That is 2/23. Lots of twos in there. We're looking for the full house. Don't have it yet. George Brocker with you here on the George Show, 710 KNUS. Weather, as you may have heard, and of course, you're going to get your analysis here. And there's actually a twist to this whole thing that's taking place nationally. We weren't the cause of it, but I think I may join in with it. I'll tell you about that in 1 second. Here's what we've got on tap for today. A high of 43 degrees. That's pretty good. If you're a Coloradan, I mean, if you've been here for decades, 43 degrees in weather is close to thong weather. I mean, that is really pretty good. A low of only 23, but so what? Friday, we shoot up to 52 degrees. And folks, this is where the weather people have made a sudden and large change. If you go back just 2 days ago, if you just go back to Tuesday, they told us that Saturday and Sunday looked like 45 degrees and 48 degrees. They've shifted that up a bit here, almost, I think, 7 or 8%. Saturday is going to be 53 degrees. Oh, no, that's almost a 20% shift up for Saturday. And we go from 48 to 51 degrees on Sunday. That's a warm weekend, folks. That's an awesome opportunity. One other thing, if you're thinking about going up and skiing, and I do every weekend, unfortunately for Big Daddy, it's a drill weekend. I read an article where Steamboat over the month of January has gotten like 16 feet, not inches, 16 feet of new snow. That is crazy awesome. It's a heck of a drive to get up there to Routt County, but well worth it once you're there. That's not a day trip, folks. Maybe Breckenridge, Winter Park, or day trips. Steamboat, you got to spend the night. That's the kind of thing. We get into Monday, and they're relatively consistent, 45, 43 degrees. We're in that area right there. And, of course, we'll keep you up to date. But here's what's changed with weather. I found this article. Billy did too. There is a phenomenon taking place now called weather betting. And it's becoming a real thing. Sports betting obviously has been around. We've got DraftKings, who I think, by the way, are perfect people for the weather because of the word draft. But and they could say, bet on weather, it blows, or something like that. I don't know. But apparently weather betting is a real thing.
It doesn't suck when you lose.
It doesn't suck when you lose. Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's raining money, something like that.
Exactly.
But there is a one website called Roto Grinders, and there's a guy that works for it named Kevin Roth. He is a sports meteorologist. Now listen to this, and this is how this is sort of taken off.
It's not to stop just putting two words together and saying they mean something.
I like the. I mean, maybe we could be like radio meteor. Actually, Don Day's a radio meteorologist, so that's already been taken.
Yeah.
We have to come up with something.
Yeah.
Politics meteorologist. Maybe.
Maybe. Doesn't have that ring. Doesn't look good.
No, it doesn't. Sports meteorologist sounds awesome.
Yeah.
This guy, here's a quote from this article, and it's a Fox 5 NewYork.com article. While not every game is going to have a big impact from the weather, before you place every bet, you should know what kind of weather you're getting for that game. There's, of course, rainouts, which you don't get in most other sports. In baseball, you can get games completely wiped away. You can have rain approaching in the fifth inning, and it can delay the games or end the game early. Are those winds blowing out to center to help carry a home run ball? Are the winds blowing in to suppress home runs? So the way this works is you can actually end up betting things on things like what will be the first day of snowfall? How much snow will a certain place get? Will it rain? I mean, this is crazy stuff. The problem, it seems like, is how do you prove it up, right? Like, it would have to be pretty geospecific, because there are even times where in Parker, we're getting pummeled with snow and nothing's going on in Highlands Ranch, or vice versa. So I don't know how they measure that, but I love where this is going, Billy. There's got to be a way for us to get a sponsor, like a legit pay us money sponsor for sports weather betting.
I keep thinking that eventually that means that either you or I are going to be like bothering Lisa Hidalgo going, come on, I need the hookup.
Yeah, right.
How many inches? No, you got to tell me first. Come on.
Yeah.
You got to shave some points off this. We're going to do 6 inches. We're going like 9 or 10. You got to tell me. I need Daddy needs a new shirt.
Yeah, that's right.
I got to have
Daddy needs to buy dinner.
This is not good. Yeah. I'm in the hole, like, $150 this bookie because of that blizzard last time.
Wonderfully brilliant texters. Here's one.
Yeah.
I predicted weather betting.
That's good. That is really good.
Fantastic. Also, by the way, someone has reminded us something we were going to talk about and make reference to anyway. Groundhog Day, of course, if you heard the news at the top of the hour, Puxatawny Phil Part 27 or whatever he is, the big furry fat rat, has come out and seen his shadow, which means we're all dead by June. Or no, it means 6 more weeks of winter.
Oh.
I would like to know if Lisa Hidalgo would take up the challenge of making a prediction based on her own shadow. Like, do you think we could get her to go outside on the same day?
Possibly.
And depending upon what she sees, predict whether it'll be a longer or shorter weather. I keep threatening this, but it's really just sloth that keeps me from executing it. And that is, I want to get the Farmer's Almanac, and I want to pull that out every day and compare it to what the weather geniuses say. And then the next day follow up and be like, guess who won this week? Or guess who won today? Farmer's Almanac won today. I got to go out and buy that. Barnes & Noble, I'm sure, has something like that. I'd buy it off of Amazon because they'll have it delivered by the time the show ends. But I am haunted by Ken Buck's words that Amazon and Google are tracking my every thought.
Oh, yeah, they are. They are.
Yeah, well, I mean, but they do a good job, man. I don't know if they're steering me towards things or if they just know. I can't tell.
Yeah, what I love about the Amazon Google connection is that you search for something once, and those pants will follow you for 6 weeks.
Oh, things keep popping. Oh, yeah, that's absolutely right.
I accidentally, in a search for something, I accidentally misspelled a name.
No,
one of the names
prawn?
Was it
prawn?
No, it's just a transposing of 2 letters, but it's actually some sort of an internet security company. So for literally now 3 weeks, I keep getting ads from this internet security company because they are certain that I am looking to upgrade the IT solutions for my business. And I keep thinking, y'all are wasting your money. However, just to play along, every once in a while, I just refresh the algorithm by clicking on it because I know they're going to have to pay a little money for the click, and then it's going to follow me some more. But all the time, I get this thing that pops up, and it's like, we will secure your business. We will. I just have fat fingers when I'm typing. I'm sorry. I'm an idiot. So they're wasting their money. But I
know what you're talking about because when you go back to Amazon, it reminds you of something you searched for months ago. Like, are you still interested in a piano bench? And I'm like, nah, not anymore.
Are you still
just
looking
stop
for
it.
That Halloween costume that looks like, one of the Care Bears?
No. Actually, I am still interested in that, but no, I get what you're
that's
saying.
For Saturday nights.
Another one of our genius texters, Phil, and that's Punxsutawney Phil, because this number is way too high for Phil Weiser. Phil is only accurate 39% of the time.
Well, that's because I think part of the issue is that the dudes in the top hats have to also be able to speak. They say groundhog ease, which I have no idea how you'd even train in that or what it is. And so I think the groundhog's just talking smack. And the kids are making some stuff up.
I am reminded again of the great movie from 30 years ago, Groundhog Day, that I had mentioned before that my son and I just watched. And one of my favorite lines is just when the groundhog, he kidnaps the groundhog. Yeah. They're getting ready to drive off of that cliff in the quarry there. And he's saying things like, don't drive angry.
Yeah.
I tell my son Jeff that all the time. Don't drive angry. Don't drive angry. Which could be a segue right into this ridiculous story about the fact that road rage appears to be going through the roof here. Yeah. State Patrol says road rage increased 4.5%, 31,760 aggressive driving calls that the agency responded to. Now, what I can't tell is maybe some of those are multiples. Like somebody is such an a-hole behind the wheel that you're getting 3 or 4 calls and like, please come and stop whatever car Billy's driving. But this is craziness. I wanted to get Matt Packard on. He's the chief of State Patrol. He's the colonel. But as it turns out, that phone number was on the old DA phone. I don't have it on I'm just a regular guy phone.
Oh, man.
So, Matt, if you're listening or anyone that works for State Patrol, I'd love to have you or your incredibly witty spokesperson on to discuss this because I've seen it myself, man. Billy, I don't know if you've seen aggressive driving out there. But there are people for whom it's not a matter of I want to get from point A to point B as fast as possible because I'm that guy. I can do that. It's the dudes who, if you linger too long in the left lane, and the way State Patrol and everyone else in law enforcement counts it is they're numbered, and they're numbered from center to the right. So we call that the number 1 lane. If you linger too long in the number 1 lane, there are dudes who will haunt you. Like it's not enough that if you wait too long and you even get over, they either drift in behind you and give that 2 or 3 inches behind you, or they pull up next to you to try to give you that eye. And I'm like, what are you, buddy? Just move on, brother. What's going on?
Yeah. Why are we doing this?
And then I think to myself, do you like it that I'm pointing a gun at you while we're driving? And instantly I feel regretful in that decision.
Yeah, it's interesting. Back when I was a teenager, it takes me way back. I actually had, and this was just for fun, but I had bought a thing. It was a novelty. It looked like a radar detector, but it had buttons on there. And so it was like a machine gun and a grenade launcher and a bomb. And so the idea was that, when someone cut you off, you'd push the little button. And it was cute. It was funny. But we've taken that into real life, and it's getting kind of scary. One of the things that I will do, and it's not necessarily advisable, but
hold on, where are you going with this?
No, if you're gonna, if we're driving down the road and you're gonna tailgate me, and I move out of the way, and you're gonna pull in behind me into that middle lane, and continue to tailgate me, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna speed up about 10 more miles an hour, and as soon as you begin to close that distance, I'm letting my foot off the accelerator.
Oh, good for you,
because you are immediately going to start catching up to me very, very quickly. And who knows? It was some sort of a road hazard that caused me to suddenly, I didn't push on the brake. I just had to take my foot off the gas because I saw a road hazard up there and I was being safe.
It's thinking not my ahead fault to what happens when they collide with me.
Exactly. It's not my fault that this jackass behind me who's been tailgating me wasn't paying attention and ran into the rear end of my car. Not my fault.
Yeah, that's
I'm sorry he's an idiot. And also, when those guys that tailgate all of a sudden start creeping up on you and it becomes very, very quick and they can't judge that 2 to 3 inches as well as they normally can, they give up. It takes me a couple of minutes and they're gone. Yeah, sure, they insult me and do little waves and stuff, but I have a visual thing that I do that makes them very, very, very mad. Now, here, if you are on the YouTubes, you'll be able to see what I do.
Hold on, you hurl feces at them.
No, as I'm driving. So we'll be driving, and I'll look over at you, and I'll go like this.
And what is that? What is it? Hold on, when you're looking down, what are you doing?
What I'm doing is I'm looking at them, looking at my crotch, looking at them, looking at my crotch.
Oh my God.
Smiling at them, then nodding, looking back at my crotch. And so I'm basically trying to give the suggestion about, hey, I've got something to basically place inside of your mouth.
Oh, no, my God. Oh my God, Billy. How many truckers have given you the thumbs up when you do that?
Well, normally they're so angry at me, and then I'm making this type of suggestion. They're like, and they just speed off. Yeah, it's absolutely hilarious because once it clicks in their mind, it's one of those things.
The act of tapping the brakes, as you know, is called brake checking.
Yeah, you can't do that.
That's a tougher one. But remember this: when law enforcement comes out to investigate a crime, if you hit a car from behind, there's a 9 in 10 chance you're going to be the one that's held accountable because the idea is you are responsible for your car and the things that are in front of you. If someone hits you from behind, it's going to be on them. That's why when you see a chain reaction collision, everybody working backwards tends to get a ticket because they struck the car in front of them and then they dump it all on the DA to try to figure out all this other stuff. But
also remember this, that if the car is, coming in and those, where they're driving and you change lanes and they're speeding up and they cut in behind you and then slam on their brakes, that's called swooping. That is also illegal.
Swooping.
Yeah, that's illegal. And many times if you swoop like that and you come in, you hit another car, your insurance company will not cover any of the damages. You are on the hook for all of it.
How do they know if you swoop? That's just got to be witness statements?
Yeah, it has to do with And again, the insurance companies, oddly enough, have enough experience in this that they have reference points to what kind of damage does a car do when it hits another car going 40 miles an hour. What does it do when it's going 50? What does it do when it's going 30? They're also pretty good at figuring out those geometric angles based on where that crash hits the car. And so they can kind of, redo a lot of what's been going on. But another one of those things is you get those like State Farm's got the drive safe and save.
Yeah, right.
Got one. That's actually, it's a GPS system as well. So that will also, in those instances, that will be another set of data that they will be able to show. They will say, this car was traveling X number of miles an hour on this road. They didn't do this. They didn't swerve over and cut you off. They didn't do any of that. This is probably the other car's fault. Yeah.
The road rage thing is real. And I wish, and I'm looking through this article, but a lot of these things, not a lot.
Yeah.
A number of these things end up turning into things that are not just road rage anymore, especially like when dudes pull over. And you don't see it a lot with women. You don't see a lot of women.
No, it's guys.
I've seen women engage in road rage. Don't get me wrong. But rarely do you see a woman pull over, another woman pull over, and then they get out and it's a hair pulling thing.
No.
But you do see dudes and something happens to them, man. And I think it's only within a certain age range where the testosterone / pride thing overwhelms any judgment that they have. And it becomes horrible. If you recall, there was a former, God, this just happened. In fact, this case may still be pending. It could be over. If I describe it to you, I hope you remember. It was like a former CU Buffs player, and I think he's out with his cousin or his younger brother or something. There's a disagreement with this other car about something. They pull into a parking lot. One guy gets out to throw punches. The other guy gets out to shoot bullets, and he shot and killed this dude, in front of his little brother. And I'm like, that's it, man. That's my worst nightmare, is you end up thinking you're bringing a fist to a fist fight, and it turns out you didn't get the memo. Oh, no, there's a knife or a gun here. Did you forget yours?
Yeah, exactly. And I've told my kids that there is nothing as far as road rage that the other person can do or anything else that merits you confronting them personally. There's nothing. Do not engage. Don't be angry. That's why I do the little,
don't drive angry.
Well, that's why I do the little thing about, the gesture at the head and stuff, and doing that because I'm not threatening you. I'm not asking you to fight me. I'm not doing that. I'm suggesting another course of action. I'm suggesting an action of love.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if maybe we can work this out with a few cuddles.
The whole let's settle this with your mouth thing is so uncomfortable, buddy. I'm surprised you haven't been shot at, really, honestly.
Well, let's just say they've missed.
That's holy smokes.
I've had a gun brandished at me. Yeah.
Listen, one of the things that we're getting here are a bunch of texts in here, and I should remind people, and I do this every morning. You can communicate with us right here live on air. And as you know, if you text into the show, there's a good chance I'll read it on air. Good chance. And two, that I'll respond to it, whether it's during the show and you can see me look away and maybe type in some stuff. That's what I'm doing, man. I'm responding to the listeners. So go to that 710knus.com website or 710knus app. I love the app because the show just sounds better, honestly, than over the air. You can go and text us. I'll read a couple of these in a second. And then you can also go to YouTube. And that's my big desire for you folks right now, is to come and get a glimpse. If you have an image in your mind of what this voice matches to in terms of a body, you're probably wrong, because I feel like I'm a cross between a Brad Pitt, Matt Damon, Anderson Cooper meets Uncle Fester. I don't know how those things all get together, but
I'm just a giant disappointment. I'm as if the David Crosby had a love child of Shamu. Yes, that's
without the coloring.
Exactly. That's basically it. Yeah.
But that happens. You've got the Mike Tyson.
Yeah.
And if you see this guy, you think this dude should have a Barry White voice of some kind of says, I'm a monster. He made me a monster. So check it out on YouTube and do us a favor. Subscribe to this thing. We had another meeting yesterday. We are so close to Mark Crowley's goal. They're going to allow Mark to have access to real food once we hit that goal. But for everybody listening, and I have no authority to enforce this, everybody gets a car. You subscribe, every person gets a car. I'm not sure from whom or what kind of car, but I've been told that's the pitch to make. So go out there and watch. Here's some of the texts. That's HMMM. More meth and other drugs and criminals in the state, and suddenly we have more angry drivers. Think there's a connection there. It's a good question, Janet, but I'll say this. I don't think there's a direct correlation in the Venn diagram. And folks, if you don't remember that term, that's because, like me, you didn't pay a lot of attention in high school math, but it's real. It's like the moon and the sun kind of eclipse thing.
So it's the circles, circle graph.
It's the circles. Yeah. That's right. The Venn diagram's the circles. It's not an eclipse. I don't think so at all. Is there some overlap? Yes, but I don't think you have to be a criminal or meth laden to make some of the crappy decisions that men, and I'm going to guess between the ages of 16 and 35. I just made those numbers up, but it feels like that's the range where you're willing to make decisions that simply, if you said them out loud later in the day, people would go, what's wrong with you? Why would you do that, dude?
Yeah. And it is. And we also have to realize that our cars are an extension of not just ourselves, but also our ego. And it's this weird thing in America where we view that bubble of our automobile as our independent, sovereign land that is only allowed to us at that point in time. And anybody else that is trying to merge or be around us is assaulting our independence. Get away from me. In other countries, like in Europe, it's this weird amoeba thing where everybody's on the same team and they're all trying to get everywhere. And if I have to slow down a little bit to let you in so that we all can keep going 45, okay, I'll do that. But here, it's a competition.
Well, listen,
I don't know where the finish line is. I've never seen it, but we're all trying to get there as fast as possible.
I think there's a lot to be said.
Else.
Look, to be fair, they will stomp you to death without emotion at a soccer match. But
yes,
in driving, I agree. There's no emotion to their driving. It's just much more practical.
Really weird.
But in America, there is a subtle competition thing, and there's also this proprietary thing.
Yeah.
You believe that the space that you occupy in that lane is somehow yours, like you've deeded it, like possession is 9/10 of the law thing here.
Yep.
And if somebody tries to mess with your ingress or egress out of a road or whatever, you instantly feel aggrieved. But there's also that competition piece. Like, I'm going to make sure I turn right before this guy, or I can't explain it, but I do own the fact that that's still, even at my ripe age of 41, it's still very, very difficult to separate myself from that. Meanwhile, I'm driving with Jeff. Jeff is the safest driver on the road, and in many ways it makes him dangerous. And what I tried to tell him is it's gotten to the point where he gets really pissed off at Dad. And I'm like, son, and I'm doing this gesture with my hand where I'm like, buddy, let's pick it up.
Yeah.
And he's yelling at me, Dad, it's 35 miles per hour. I'm like, you're the only thing on the road. I said, look at Nana in the wheelchair. She just passed you on the sidewalk, brother. I'm like, you can go a little, Dad, why are there laws? You should know better than anyone.
Oh my
and I'm
God,
like,
that's great.
Oh, and what do you say to your son? Because I love the idea that when I'm not in the car, when he turns 16, he will be following every single thing. We could be at a don't turn right on red light.
Yeah.
It could be nobody on the planet Earth is within a mile of that intersection. I'm like, just go ahead. He's like, Dad, it says no turn on. I'm like, oh, I want to have pride. And at the same time, I'm like, bro, you're going to waste years of your life in the car.
My oldest son is exactly like that. He is the safest driver. He has one of those drive safe and save things because we got State Farm. He has one of those in his car, and he gets like the maximum discount because dude never speeds. They don't like that he hits his brakes a little too fast. That, they'd like him to come up to a stop a little slower. That's the only thing. Other than that, he is the model driver, and it makes me
Jeff
very
is the
jealous.
model driver.
Yeah, my son that's up in college, good, drove a little fast. My daughter, who's been driving now for about 3.5 months, not so much. She's I need to get large pool noodles and put them on the outside of the car because she keeps bouncing into things. She said,
oh my sweet goodness, buddy, that's not a good thing.
No, she said 2 things in 3 months. Not good.
Not
good
any
at
of
all.
them living, or were they living?
No, they were both other. One was another car. One was I don't know what the other thing was because she wouldn't tell me, but she cracked the back bumper. So I do not know what it is. But I'm like,
the stationary inanimate objects that you're like, how did that happen?
I wasn't too surprised when she comes home and there's some bumps and bruises in the car, because this is the girl that while learning to drive, practicing, she ran into a park bench. No, those aren't mobile. Nothing changed. It was sitting there. It wasn't doing anything. I don't know why. And yes, we had to jump the curb to do it. So yes, that is the skill level that we're working off of. She's a wonderful, talented, beautiful girl. Love her to death.
The recommendation for you, Billy, is you should skip the noodles and just buy a truck. It seems to me, though, the noodles actually minimize some of your liability. The truck,
exactly.
There could be lives lost if you go down the truck road.
Trucks are,
young people today are all Amatons with 9mm guns.
Yeah,
they were public school trained. Let's see here. Okay, now listen. In the middle of all of this stuff that we talk about, here's a text. This one doesn't really hit on the topic of the day. Battle of activists, dead whales on the East Coast likely due to wind turbine farms. Like, we were going to obviously talk about that for an hour on the show today. Absolutely. Unfortunately, we didn't do that. And then the other texter with the truck saying, girls with trucks, ? Yeah, we're all a little scared. Someone else, can you let us know where you watched Groundhog Day, or did you rent it, please? I think I'll watch it tonight. We watched it online. It was some website called OnlyFans. And if you just Google Groundhog, I'm kidding. I'm totally kidding.
/Brockler/
No, right. No, Mike. I wonder if there is such a thing there. It's actually this show. If you go to OnlyFans, it's just the live stream of the George Show on 710. But it's a clothing optional version.
And we have better hats.
And we have better hats, but only hats. It's really onlyhats.com.
That's all it is. Yes.
No, I did go on to Amazon. We couldn't find it anywhere else, so we just did the Amazon. I think it was $2.99 to rent it. And listen, if you have the choice between SD and HD, who cares, right? Like I didn't even know HD existed in 92. Just spend the $2.99. It's well worth it. You will spend more on that on your Big Mac and fries, and this will get you 2 hours of good fun right there. More road rage with guns and actually discharging firearm happening. Truck driver just had passenger window shot out. I do worry about the truck driver thing because that's legit. That is legit scary. That job is becoming more dangerous for a lot of different reasons. But frankly, I guess we're getting to the point too, especially as our legislature debates whether or not we're allowed to have anything more than a Derringer for self-protection. What do you tell the truck driver guys?
Yeah.
I mean, these are dudes that many times pull over in the middle of nowhere rather than careen down I-70, burning out your brakes and then killing a bunch of people by setting them on fire only to have the governor reduce the sentence. That's a different story.
Yeah.
But that is a real
familiar.
thing, man.
Yeah.
That's a real thing. Hell, we could probably do a whole segment on road. Maybe we just did a whole segment on road rage.
Yeah.
Listen, we got to cut away for a break because we need to, FCC compliance-wise, get the stuff we're obligated to do. We love to do this. It's the best produced part of the show, and that is the Thorpe Report and the always well-researched. And Billy has teased me with the fact that one of the topics today is a landmine.
Oh, is it ever?
I'm kind of anxious to see what it is. That's the You Choose the News. Stick around. It's George Brockler on The George Show, 710 KNUS.
Want to take your favorite radio station wherever you go? Well, now there's an app for that. No matter where you are, stream your favorite shows. Tap the app to listen to podcasts. Talk back to your favorite local hosts.
At the tone, leave a message.
Call the show. Set your alarm. Enter contests and win prizes. All in the palm of your hand. Available now for iOS and Android devices in the App Store or Google Play. And best of all, it's free. Download today.
Welcome back. It is segment 2 of hour 1 of 223. George Brockler here on The George Show. If you're just tuning in, you missed some, I don't know how to describe it, Billy, but some wicked banter about road rage that somehow we segued into from a discussion of Groundhog Day. I don't know how any of it happens. It's like the sausage getting made.
It's magic.
But you've made it to the best part of the show. This is the reward for getting up early or focusing on the first hour of the show. Yet there's a little bit of fluff, but this is the good stuff. We call it the Thorpe Report, followed by You Choose the News, William.
Hey, good morning, sir. You were talking about it earlier, but that Arctic air mass finally is leaving our state, and our high temperatures are steadily going to return over the course of the week. The high in Denver today is expected to be right around 43 degrees. Lots of sunshine, hopefully to melt that snow. Our roads are still a mess where I live. Snow is going to come to an end in the mountains, and drier weather is going to settle in. Next chance of snow for the high country will start out on Monday and possibly Tuesday as well. As for Denver, our next chance of snow, possible flurries on Monday. Friday, though, our highs should be up near 52 and in the 50s over the weekend. A teenager was sentenced to 7 years in district court and 3 years in juvenile court for a total of 10 years behind bars in connection with the 2020 house fire in Denver's Green Valley Ranch neighborhood that killed a Senegalese family of 5. The fire was reported around 2 o'clock in the morning on August 5th of 2020. Later that day, the fire department confirmed a toddler, a child, and 3 adults had died. Investigators suspected arson. Family had immigrated to Colorado from Senegal. 3 juveniles were charged in that fire.
One quick thing about that.
Yes.
Let's, and this could be its own segment. Maybe it will later on the show, but let's be real. This guy, according to the article that I read, was maybe one of the least culpable, but he did participate in this. And what happened there is a mass murder. We haven't heard anybody describe it that way, but when you murder 5 people, and keep in mind, he burned them to death. He and these other clowns that should go to prison, in my opinion, for eternity, but they can't because they're juveniles. More on that in a little bit here, maybe on later in the show. But 2 of these victims were a 2-year-old and a 6-month-old.
Yeah.
And I want you to picture what it is like to imagine your 2 little babies burning to death. Oh, by the way, the rest of the 3 people escaped. The rest of them burned to death. I don't know how those other 3 people get up in the morning or function for the rest of their lives. But this guy right here, as remorseful as he is, and the least culpable, was on the road. He was just shy of 18 years old when he did it, which is Adultville. That's 7 plus 3 year sentence. That ain't 10 years, folks. It's not like this guy's going to serve 2 years for every life he participated in burning to death, because the way our ridiculous, broken sentencing system works, this guy will likely be parole eligible somewhere in the 5 to 6 year range. That is about a year for every life he burned to death with these other clowns. Hard to imagine that that's justice. But one other thing, the judge that sentenced him did not really sentence him. This and the paper didn't report it. This was almost a stipulated, agreed upon sentence. The DA and the defense showed up and said, we both agree for 10 years. And the judge in this case, a guy named Marty Egelhoff, fantastic judge. He was a longtime prosecutor in Denver. He was a chief deputy. I don't question his judgment at all. But folks, this kid is going to serve this adult now is likely going to serve about a year and a few months for each life he helped burn to death.
Yeah, I really hope that at some point or another, again, that's never going to happen, but in this country, we would start to have a conversation about what justice means in these cases. I think that we've talked about it before, that too many times we are focusing on what is just to the criminal.
Oh my
just
gosh,
like when we
all
talk
the time.
about, we talk about harm reduction sites. Well, that's just trying to reduce the harm of the drug user. It's not reducing the harm of the community.
That's
not
exactly
reducing
right.
the harm
You're right.
of anybody else going around there. It's just focused on that individual and what's harming them. And I'm sorry if the other people that made it out of that house think about that for the rest of their lives, they have to live with the fact that they couldn't save the babies. That's a special kind of pain, because you're responsible for the babies. They can't feed themselves. They can't clothe themselves. They can't get themselves in and out of bed. They are completely dependent upon you,
That's right.
the adult.
That's right.
And you couldn't save them. We're going to put the guy behind for 10.
This people will be haunted for this.
Yeah.
Someone texted in and said he was 14. I don't know that that's true. The thing I read was his name was Dylan Siebert. I read that he was 17. If he was 14, yes, that's definitely a factor to consider. But remember this, if the dude only does 6 years, that means he's out before he's legal to buy alcohol. Even if he's 17 or 18 and does 6 years, he's younger than the father he murdered or helped murder. and the 4 other people in the family right there. But I'll take a look, Texter. I'll look. If he's 14, I'll definitely correct that. And that is a huge factor. There is a big gap between 14 and 17, and I acknowledge that. And it also sounds like this kid should have the least sentence out of the group. I don't have any problems with that. But 10? Really 10? 3 in the youth, in the Division of Youth Services, and then the rest in big boy prison? I don't know, man. It just feels like that is awfully light. And for even a kid that's remorseful, is it too much to say you give up maybe a real 10, which means you probably have to be sentenced to 17 to 20 to get to a real 10? And then here's another texture. He was 14 when the incident happened. He is 17 today. That was 3 years ago? Was it really?
Yeah, 3 years ago. Yeah. Well, just about, 2020, August 5th of 2020.
Well, listen, 14 is a very different proposition for me than 17. If he committed it when he was 14, that is really, really young. That's only a year older than Graham. But Graham, of course, would never do this. I mean, kids that were raised properly would never do something like this.
Part of it comes that there's a certain level of crime for me that you're making an adult decision, so you're going to get sentenced like an adult. I'm not going to send the kids to the adult prison, but I'm going to sentence you like an adult that would commit this crime because you have decided to make an adult choice. And I'm sorry, all of these kids, when they were involved in this fire, knew what they were doing. This didn't accidentally happen. They didn't accidentally set a fire to kill the family.
And remember, the motive for this was revenge.
Yeah, exactly.
One dude had been the victim of a robbery, one of the main movers here, and he had tracked his phone down to what he thought was the house where the robbers were. And of course, he's a moron. He gets the wrong house, and he burns to death these 5 people, including these 2 little babies. 14, that is considerably different than 17. So, but I still think 10 years is too light. No way am I saying that this kid gets locked up for 40 to 60 years, but 10 years just feels too light. And again, it's not rehabilitation. We have to focus on the fact that the legislature has prioritized the purposes of sentencing, and the number one thing that it says is punishment, not rehab, not some sort of it is punishment. And I just don't know if that's enough punishment. But maybe that's its own topic. Sorry to derail the news, buddy.
No, it's okay.
But do the news. We'll cut away break, give you the rest of the time for you choose the news.
Excellent. So elsewhere, Douglas County Sheriff's Office is asking for your and my help identifying suspects who broke into at least 20 cars recently overnight. Deputies were called out to 2 different apartment complexes along Park Meadows Drive and Lone Tree on January 30th after residents discovered their cars had been burglarized. Honda and Hyundai vehicles were the ones mainly targeted. They believe the break-ins began as early as 9:45 on January 29th. The suspects were captured on video driving a silver or gray Kia Sportage, and they say, but that's also likely stolen. For nearly a year, a police officer in the tiny northeastern Colorado village of Log Lane was working with a badge, a gun, and pulling people over while also having her own felony case pending.
What?
Well, now no more. Earlier this week, Officer Dawn Flizzer pleaded guilty to 2 felony charges of theft and forgery after the investigators accused her of pocketing more than $30,000 in vehicle inspection fees when she was an officer in the town of Morrison. The criminal case against her was investigated by Colorado State Patrol. She faces up to 3 years in prison and $100,000 fine for each felony conviction. She's expected to be sentenced in April, but hopefully, if she's good, they'll let her out during the day so she can still enforce the law. Because, you got to think about her.
Good grief, man.
Yeah, exactly.
Well.
And finally, some residents in mountain towns like Steamboat Springs haven't received their mail in weeks. If you're looking for a career change, today our United States Postal Service is hosting a job fair. They've got 600 open positions across Colorado. The jobs are mostly for the Denver metro area and the Front Range, but you want to work in the mountain towns, they need you desperately. Starting pay, $24.42 an hour, and then goes up from there.
And the bennies, by the way, federal employee, man, they got real benefits.
Yeah, and those trucks are really cool. I've always wanted to buy one of those mail trucks.
You know what? That would be awesome too.
Yeah. When I was a teenager, they were selling them and I didn't have the cash. They were selling them for $400 and I didn't have the extra cash. Otherwise, I would have bought a mail truck in a second.
If they're upkept and that would be good.
Yeah.
If you throw an ice cream cone on it and play music, you are probable cause to be pulled over for child molestation.
Exactly. I just think it'd be fun to have a mail truck. And they're great cars. They're a little drafty. Heater doesn't work too well. But,
is that true?
Yeah. But they're great. They're great vehicles, and they'll run forever. Yeah.
And if you remember the old 1970s hit show SWAT, I think they drove one of those cars around. They just used it for SWAT.
Exactly. It was just a SWAT truck.
Well, look, let's cut away for a break. I want to come back and get the good stuff, and that is the You Choose the News. That really is the best part of the show. Stick around to get that. And stay tuned afterwards, of course, too. But really, this is the good stuff. George Brockler on The George Show, 710 KNUS. George Brockler right back with you here at 710 KNUS. Some interesting text that came in based off of our last discussion, just off of the Thorpe Report. We'll get into those in the 7 o'clock hour, but I want to turn the show over to the guy who really is the captain of the ship anyway, Billy Thorpe, for You Choose the News.
We're taking on water. Oh, yes, it's that time again. It is time for You Choose the News, America's favorite radio news game show, where we have scoured the interwebs for mere moments and found delicious news stories about us stupid humans and given them even dumber headlines. Why? Well, they haven't told us to stop playing this game yet. But today we are proudly sponsored by KNUS. Yes, Salem is going to help you forecast the weather. We'll tell you about the special offer in just a few minutes. But first, we must play the game. All righty, sir. Here are your choices this morning. Headline number 1, the message is less important than the check clearing. Headline number 2, tainted fungi. Headline number 3, remake of Back to School. And headline number 4, hopefully it's a display item. All righty, here are your choices again, sir. The message is less important than the check clearing, tainted fungi, remake of Back to School, or hopefully it's just a display item.
For 2 good reasons. One, I'm watching The Last of Us now, and it has the word taint in it. Tainted fungi.
Tainted fungi. Here we are going to Switzerland. The government of Switzerland is telling people to please be careful when you're eating the mushrooms. They have had a especially bountiful harvest recently of the mushrooms, and people have been going out and collecting them in the forest. And, well, that's not so good because they also have seen an increase of poisoning from mushrooms go up by 25%. Yes. They did say, on the other hand, the number of calls about suicide attempts has actually decreased by 4%. I'm not sure if it's mushroom connected, but they're saying that
maybe the poisonings are suicide attempts. How do they know?
I have no idea. Said every year, some 40% of the calls concern like preschool children and accidents and everything else. But they're saying that, yes, the calls to poisoning and to help have gone up by 25% because you're not checking your mushrooms. Check your fungi before you put it in your mouth.
That's
should have that
listen,
on a t-shirt.
Again, this feels a lot like natural selection.
It is a little bit. Yeah, I just keep thinking of, well, it's obviously a mushroom. I can eat it.
There's one.
No,
put it in your mouth. It's on the ground.
Taste this one first. All right, your second choice this morning. The message is less important than the check clearing, remake of Back to School, or hopefully just a display item.
Back to School.
Remake of Back to School.
I'm looking for the landmine, by the way. I'm telling you, I'm looking for the landmine. I'm down to one choice.
We are going to Portsmouth Public Schools recently and Churchland High School. A member of the Churchland High School basketball coaching team has been fired because they performed too well in a recent junior varsity basketball game. Yes, during a girls' junior varsity basketball game, a member of the basketball staff, yes, a female, pretended to be a player, got on the court, and played for the game. Yes, the game was videotaped, and the other team rather, shrewdly realized, hey, that's not part of the team. So, yeah, she's been fired. I just keep thinking about, the choices involved there. But, yes, we're going to do this.
Coach-player can work at some levels of sports, not that one.
No, not that one, especially not when you're like an adult. That can't work. And final choice, as we're running out of time, the message is less important than the check clearing, or hopefully just a display item.
Display item.
Hopefully just a display item. Well, here we are going to go to the Circus of Books WeHo and their official Instagram account, because recently they were the victim of a theft. A slightly inebriated person walks into the shop and then grabs an item off a shelf and tries to run out the door. But the really important part of this entire story is the fact that the Circus of Books WeHo is an adult bookstore and toy shop. Yes. So the inebriated person, it's a 30-second clip available online for those that can find it. Person kind of can't really walk straight. They're kind of stumbling a little bit. And then they see it. The item that they must have. It's a 30-inch replica of a manhood.
Yes, my goodness. And they're running down the street.
Well,
with
what
this
they did is they wrapped their arms around it as if they were cradling a child, and then they tried to run out the door. My favorite part is they say that the guys that are working there are like, we were ready for him. We were on him right away. We got him. And so, yeah, the actual item, I hope it's just a display item, but it sells online for $700.
What?
Yes. It actually measures just over 30 inches, almost 7 inches wide. And the sack area is about 11 inches across.
Billy,
So
why? I can't. Listen, I can't. I'm gonna have to go wash my ears during the break.
I just love the fact the guy's like, "This is mine," and just takes off with it. Well,
do you go to trial? I mean,
no, he's just been arrested so far. So, and speaking of people that need to be arrested, that would be us here, and we are proudly sponsored by KNUS's Weather Predicting Rat. Yes, you can relive the excitement of Groundhog Day. Pretend your weather rat has a clue of what is happening and decide the day's weather. Yes, your KNUS Weather Rat is free range and organically sourced from the dumpsters just behind the building. And we think none of them still have rabies anymore. Hey, and if it doesn't work, who cares? So, back to you.
I have no idea what's coming next. My goodness. George Brock on the George Show, 710 KNUS. George Brockler back with you here, hour 2 of 4 on 710 KNUS. Of course, at 10 o'clock, we get replaced by the big man, Charlie Kirk. He goes on for an hour, and then we hear from Dennis Prager. We go right into a guy named Gorka. There's no way to get that last name wrong when you read it and pronounce it. But then we come back live and local with our buddy, Deb Flora, from 3 to 4. If you haven't checked out Deb's show, Deb finds a way to get the great interviews and from across the country. I mean, she is just well-connected, well-loved. Take a listen to the show if you haven't so far. And then, of course, 4 to 7, we downshift into my way of thinking with Stephen Tubbs. That's just really for Stefan. He knows that's an inside joke. But with Stephen Tubbs, and he always gets good interviews too. Mostly he scores the great local interviews. I love listening to Stephen for that reason. The other day he had on, if you haven't listened to the podcast, he had on Danielle Jurinsky, city councilwoman for Aurora, and another woman who has now filed a lawsuit, I think also naming former chief of police for Aurora, Vanessa Wilson. If you'll recall, that's all connected to that horrific story of the kidnapper, and that is Vanessa's former love interest, who was one of like the chief investigators for Child Protective Services. And I don't want to rehash the whole case. It's a great interview. You ought to go out and listen to it. Stephen did a really super job on that one. Now, I'm prepared to talk about a couple different things today that are big in the news, but there was a conversation that we had before the Thorpe Report and You Choose the News, where I made reference to a kid who was apparently 14 at the time that he helped burn to death 5 people, including a 2-year-old and a 6-month-old baby. And he received, in my opinion, a pretty lenient sentence. And in fact, even the judge acknowledged that. Marty Egelhoff, who is, he's been on the bench for a long, long time, but he was a prosecutor before that. Guy knows the law. He's fantastic on the law. And he also knows sentencing. He accepted the recommendations of the prosecution and the defense that there be a total of 10 years. I guess it was 7 plus 3, 3 in the Division of Youth Services and 7 in big boy prison. And it just still struck me as really light, even if the kid was 14 when he did it. His life is not, inalterably changed by virtue of that outcome, even though he helped end 5 others. But 14, man, that is young. That's a tougher one for me. When I thought he was 17, I was certain 10 years didn't make sense. One of the texters texted in and said, oh, by the way, that's the same sentence that Polis ended up giving to that dude who drove his truck recklessly, really with just disregard for human life, down I-70, careened into people. And I think he burned to death 4 people in their car. It could have been 5. I think it was 4. But then he also burned and seriously injured a bunch of others. He has the same sentence too. So if you're looking for some indication that the system values life a little bit differently than maybe you or I do, those 2 cases are probably highlights. But I made this comment. I had said that's only 1 year older than Graham, but Graham would never do anything like that. And I made a reference to good parenting. And somebody texted in, when you said your son wouldn't do it because of good parenting, sometimes good parenting can still produce a bad kid. And it makes me wonder if that's straight up legit. And again, I presume that there are good parents who have done a good job where someone else goes and commits a crime. It can't just be about committing a crime. I mean, look, my brother got a DUI 100 years ago. So it's not about crimes like that. It's not about crimes of passion. That could obviously happen too. But what is it that would lead a 14-year-old to be in a position where he's hanging out with older kids? And in the article, it says he hung out with these older kids, some guy named Bowie and some other guy. They're going to go to prison for a long time. We'll see how long. And allow himself to be part of what is obviously going to be a revenge-fueled act of setting fire to a place where you believe and intend there to be human beings on the inside, even if you think they were responsible for robbing one of the older dudes. That's tough, man. And someone texted in, it was 4 people. That's a tough thing. I want to believe, first off, I know Jeff would never, ever do that. Jeff is such a rule follower, and in a good way, but as such a rule follower, he would never allow himself to be in a situation like that. And then Trey, of course, is never capable of that. He's way past that. And Amanda would never do anything like that either. That leaves Graham. I just don't see Graham that way. He's just such a sweet, good-natured kid. They know wrong from right. And there is no doubt that what was going on here was wrong. And I guess maybe the question is, can a 14-year-old who was raised well still be part of something like this? I don't know. I don't know. I mean, is good parenting the solution to this? You know, one of the, and I want to hear your thoughts on this, 303-696-1971. I don't know if there's a study out there, but now I'd like to know the answer to this, and that is how many people that are in prison serving sentences in excess of 20 years. And that's generally because it's a violent crime. You just don't get big sentences for things that don't involve violence, usually, unless you have a well-developed criminal history. I want to know how many of those folks came from single-parent homes, came from homes where there were domestic violence, maybe there was child abuse involved. I mean, I think that's an issue here that we need to explore with the source of crime, because we don't all start off in the same place. Like, I feel truly blessed that I grew up in the household that I did. If you're talking about privilege, it ain't because of the color of my skin. The privilege that I had was to be born to George and Rita Brockler and the way they raised us. I don't know, folks. I'm interested in having that conversation with you. 303-696-1971. If you have the guts, call in. Let's have this. Someone else texted in here. That caller, I imagine texter is right. Sometimes people are just bad. Is that possible? Is it possible that you're just born bad? I mean, if that's true, then what's the role of society? I mean, isn't the idea behind society and community and religion to try to get people to a place where they know better and do better? And so when someone doesn't, do we shrug it off and say, society has no responsibility here? This was just someone who was born bad. Now, listen, I fully accept the idea that there are folks who are born with mental illness or the seeds for mental illness, and that mental illness can override some other decision-making. I get that. And not in an insanity way. Don't get me wrong. Because insanity is measured by the state of Colorado, and you cannot be diagnosed as sane or insane. That's not a diagnosis. That is a legal determination. But in the state of Colorado, the two things that have to exist are you have to know right from wrong, and not based on your own sense of morality, but based on society's standards of morality, right? And the other thing is you have to be able to form the culpable mental state. Big words that just mean you have to be able to form the intent to kill another person after deliberating on it. And deliberation isn't like a month-long analysis of whether you should do it. Deliberation is just you've given it some thought, and then you form the intent. You're telling me that a kid that is raised in a two-person functional good home, and by the way, before people go nuts and say, are you telling me kids that are raised in a single-family home or a home where the parents are divorced? I'm not saying that. I'm saying that the odds are, the statistics are, the risks are greater when you come from a single-parent home. It's a harder job. You know that. You know that if you've raised kids as a single mom or even a single dad, you know it's harder. It's infinitely harder, okay? So I'm not disparaging anyone. I'm just saying that makes it tougher. So the question is, how many of these people that aren't afflicted with some type of mental illness go on to commit horrific crimes? I'm going to use another example. How about the dude that went into the Aurora Theater? I know that case a little bit. Murdered 12 people, tried to murder hundreds, wanted to kill hundreds of human beings. That dude was completely sane. Yes, touched by mental illness for sure, but completely sane. And he came from an intact, fully functional family. Mom and dad loved each other. They cared about each other. Dad was kind of a little stoic-y, odd, like standoffish, and that kind of filtered down to the son. That part could be genetic. But mom was just a regular old mom. She was a nurse for years. They took responsibility for their kids. When this guy had problems as a youth, they didn't just shrug it off. They actually went and sought family counseling. So yes, there could be an exception, but that dude's 24. Okay. That dude's 24 when he does this. 14 is different. 14 is still well within the realm of influence from mom and dad. And that's the other thing. Maybe we need to look at juvenile murderers. How many of them come from healthy, intact, engaged homes versus homes where there are some type of violence or drug use or mental illness, single parents? I don't know, man. I'm intrigued by this. It's a factor to consider. But can good parents produce a bad kid? I don't mean a kid who makes mistakes, because this is not a mistake, right? This may have been a mistake from the standpoint of, I wish I hadn't done it. That regret doesn't equal a mistake, right? Like a mistake is where I really didn't truly appreciate what I was doing. These guys knew they were going to burn down a house with human beings on the inside. Not the ones they actually burned. They knew that. So I don't know, man. And Billy's question is, if it's bad parenting, what's the solution? What do we do? How do we fix this? 303-696-1971. Juvenile crime is surging. Murderous crime, too. You remember there was an article in the Gazette the other day about Denver seeing an uptick in the number of juvenile murderers and juvenile victims. Here's a text. Do you think that the parents should also be held accountable for their child's actions? What a fascinating question. What a fascinating question. Under the criminal law, only if they empowered the person to commit this act. And here's what I mean by that. If you know your kid doesn't have a driver's license and is engaged in driving before or whatever, and you are reckless in leaving your keys around for the kid to take the car and they do it, yes, but I don't know if that's criminal liability. That's probably civil liability there. That's like sue you for money, take your home and your future earnings and stuff. But I don't know about criminal responsibility for that. That's interesting for me. Someone texted, hoping you can get Tay Anderson and Candy C. DeBaca on your show. They could guest host You Choose the News. I don't know where that crazy thought comes from, but I'm fairly certain, and it's not Tay anymore. Remember, he changed his name to Antoine Tay, or if I'm mispronouncing it, it's not on purpose, but something different. Antonin or Antoine Tay, I don't know what it is. Here's another texter. Want to talk about trying juveniles as adults? Yeah, we can do that. I mean, listen, trying juveniles as adults is harder today than it's ever been. A lot of folks cheer that on. Let's be clear about the process for that. If you are 16 or 17 years old and you engage in a first or second class felony, that's like murder, first degree or second degree, or attempted first degree murder, some of your more aggravated sex assaults with kidnappings attached, things like that. You can be tried as an adult. In the old days, the DA just had the discretion to do it. And you would file in district court and say, you've committed an adult crime and you're super close to being an adult. We're going to hold you accountable as an adult. Back in 2016, the legislature, and I want to be clear about this, bipartisan, right? Senator Laura Woods was a prime sponsor of these two bills. Well, that's not true. 2016 wasn't the change with the reverse transfer hearing. It was about that time. I was about to tell you about the sentencing scheme. We changed some years ago the process so that we allowed the defense, the juvenile defense, to force the prosecution to conduct a mini trial called a reverse transfer hearing in front of a district court judge, which is the defense's opportunity to try to convince the court, you are wrong, prosecutor. This kid should be better handled in juvenile court. That was super controversial. It doesn't exist I don't even think it exists in half the states. But here in woke Colorado, we provide the juvenile the opportunity to force the victims through a mini trial, force the prosecution to put on pretty labor-intensive case. This isn't about probable cause, folks. That's a preliminary hearing. That's a legit thing. I get that. This is something different. This is a mini trial to try to convince the judge to send the juvenile murderer, and that's usually a murderer, back down to juvenile court. I've done these hearings. In fact, the last one I did was for the 16-year-old murderer of Kendrick Castillo from the STEM school shooting. And we went through, I want to say it was 2 weeks. I mean, maybe it was just shy of that, but like a 2-week mini trial, could have been a little longer than a week, where the defense put on a ton of mitigating evidence. Really, the issues we were trying were ones of mental issues, the background of the 16-year-old. Of course, at the end of the day, the judge rightfully concluded that no, they should be tried as an adult. But it is not a slam dunk to prosecute a juvenile as a murder. If you're below the age of 16, now it's even harder. Now it's harder. It's not just the universe of charges that could get them there, but the procedure now is different too. You now have to get the permission to move the juvenile into adult court. That makes it pretty difficult in the state of Colorado to prosecute a juvenile as an adult. And by the way, there are cases where the judge has disagreed with the prosecutor and said, no, this person should be better prosecuted in the juvenile system. Keep in mind, the juvenile system is night and day different than adulthood. The adult system the very first purpose of sentencing is punishment. In the juvenile system, the entire system is set up for rehabilitation. And punishment becomes maybe even below tertiary in terms of one of the goals of the juvenile system. What that means necessarily is that, and I think for the STEM shooter too, the maximum sentence available to a judge for a kid who gets adjudicated for any charge, misdemeanor or felony, spends exactly the same outside of violent juvenile offender or aggravated juvenile offender. It's like 7 years out of home placement. That simply can't be the right answer. That just simply can't be the right answer for crimes as big as first-degree murder or second-degree murder. Now, that's just a hard process. It's just a very, very difficult process. You should know that the legislature, by the way, is set up this year, I think, to want to change the age at which a juvenile can be brought into the juvenile system, even for murder, to increase it to 14, so that 13 and below, I think that's where they're going, 13 and below, there would be no access to the juvenile justice system at all. Instead, I presume it would be treated like we treat truancy or something ridiculous like that, like it would be a purely civil system. Folks, that is not going to make Denver safer. That is not going to make Aurora safer. That's not going to make any part of Colorado safer. That is an offender-focused change in the law, not a victim-focused change in the law. We haven't had a victim-focused change in the law. We do maybe every 1 or 2 years. And usually it's something that Senator Fields Rhonda Fields is a part of. If you see Senator Fields on a bill, chances are it's a victim-focused bill. Other than that, the entire other side of her caucus, that part of her caucus, is focused on offenders and trying to make things easier on offenders. That's their focus. And if you ask them in their heart of hearts, the offenders are the victims. They're the victims of the system. Now, listen, the phone lines are starting to light up. 303-696-1971. Got a ton of texts in here. We're going to continue this conversation, but I got to cut away for a break. Before I do that, though, I want to tell you about our good friend, Mitch Floria. Mitch Floria is a wizard when it comes to improving the look and feel of the interior of your home. Bottom line is this. Valentine's Day is upon us, and maybe you're thinking about getting something special for a loved one that's for them alone. But have you ever thought about the idea of looking to your spouse and saying, maybe our Valentine's Day gift is to each other? And maybe what we're going to do is we're going to take Mitch Floria up on his awesome offer of 20% off of labor or throw in a sink with any countertop package. And we're going to improve the look and feel of our kitchen, maybe our master bathroom, if you can still use that term. Mitch Floria is the only place you need to go. Yeah, you can check prices with other folks. You can check selection. But if you're looking for someone where customer service cannot be outdone, it's Mitch Floria and the Art of Granite. If you're looking for a place that does more than just granite, even though it's baked into the name, theartofgranite.com, it's Mitch Floria. He does the marble, the quartz. And when you hear quartz, that's the man-made stuff. They can do anything with it. The granite, whatever else, this guy's got it going on. Now listen, go to theartofgranite.com and just wet your palate there. In fact, you could even call Mitch, 303-386-5919, 303-386-5919. And that rings the phone on his hip. You could do those things. The thing you need to do, if you're considering it all, going down the road of improving the look of the interior of your home, is you just got to get in the car, make the super easy drive down 6th Avenue. And right about 6th Avenue and Colfax-ish, I-70-ish, you get to his shop down there and shop. It's a showroom is what it is. And there's so much stuff. It's on the outside. It's on the inside. The folks he has there, I mean, honestly, the customer service is the number one reason to go to Mitch Floria over any of these other folks that do this out there. It's not the material, even though they can get you anything. It's the craftsmanship. And it's the customer service. That's theartofgranite.com, theartofgranite.com. When we come back, Jennifer, Neil, everybody else calling in at 303-696-1971. I promise we'll get to you. And the texts, so many texts. I'll read them during the break. It's George Brockler on The George Show, 710 KNUS.
Want to take your favorite radio station wherever you go? Well, now there's an app for that. No matter where you are, stream your favorite shows. Tap the app to listen to podcasts. Talk back to your favorite local hosts.
At the tone, leave a message.
Call the show. Set your alarm. Enter contests and win prizes. All in the palm of your hand. Available now for iOS and Android devices in the App Store or Google Play. And best of all, it's free. Download today.
We're back at 710 KNUS. George Brocker with the George Show here. Text coming in. And of course, we have full lines. You can be part of that conversation by dialing 303-696-1971. And if it's busy, I'll tell you when a line comes open. The texts here. One, thank you, Alexa, for correcting me. It's not the new term is not master bedroom or bathroom. It's primary. Okay, I'll try to adopt that. Here's one. I think criminals must be held to account by incarceration, but where are you going to put them? Prisons are full. Yeah, can we talk about that for just a second? Let's remember how the prisons got full. Do you remember when Governor Hickenlooper championed and went out and advertised, I've just closed down 2 prisons? He did. And I think one was not Fort Logan, but it was like Fort Logan, but out there. He closed down 2 prisons. And all he did was suck up all the excess bed space in the rest of the prison system by closing it down and shifting those prisoners there. Didn't decrease the prison population much at all, but decreased the available space. If it's true that the prisons are full, let's open back up the 2 that we shut down. I mean, look, the answer can't be, as the population begins to be more violent and commit more crimes, that we just say, well, we've limited ourselves in the number of beds we'll make available to protect society. Do you know who's done that when it comes to violent juvenile crime? Colorado. That's right. Under the law, there are a fixed number of juvenile beds available to house these violent kid criminals. No doubt about it. And all that means is, even if crime spikes amongst juveniles, it doesn't increase. There's no built-in elevator or escalator in the law where if all of a sudden we had a 200% surge in violent juvenile criminals, we get an increase in the number of beds. No, that's not it. So what happens is, when you have these violent juvenile criminals, now the system has to make a decision of prioritizing them. And so all of a sudden we have to go, well, do we keep the aggravated rapist juvenile in there, or the murderer? That's the system that bonehead Colorado has put in place when it comes to trying to protect us from violent juveniles. So the answer is, you build more prisons. Yes, you continue to work on the societal issues that create a culture where this is possible, but you don't say, well, we don't want to create more prisons because then we'll just fill them up with criminals. That's right. At some point, and for some period of time, society has to be entitled to protect itself from the members among us who would victimize us. It's suicide to do anything else, and that's the road we're on right now. Here's another one. Good parenting isn't a guarantor of a good kid, but it's a strong determinant factor. I agree with that. Look, can bad people come from good parents? Yes. But I'll bet you, if we look at statistically, and there's got to be a study out there, and if there isn't, there's a PhD waiting for someone who does this. My guess is the vast majority of the violent criminals out there come from a certain, and when I say demographic, I'm not talking race. I'm talking a demographic as measured by household, and maybe it's also economics, and there's got to be stuff out there on this. But it seems to me that good parenting, good, committed, intact homes where there isn't violence or mental illness or drug use is a better guarantor, and not 100%, of a law-abiding kid who's less likely to engage in violent crime than the alternative. That's my best guess. Here's one. Giving a 17-year-old a muscle car to drive, street racing, yeah, maybe, but I gotta be honest. If I gave a street car or a muscle car to Jeff's driving that muscle car at exactly the speed limit. I mean, the car doesn't make the person who's making the decisions. That's just true. Let's get to the phone lines. We're going to take them in order, and I'll let you know when a phone line comes open. Jennifer, you're on 710 KNUS. What do you think?
Well, George, you handled part of what I was going to talk about.
Sorry.
The cap on the juvenile beds, is definitely concerning, but something that's really gotten my attention, and I'm not sure how I feel about it. That case in Lakewood, the apartment fire, and 2 juveniles, and we're not talking like 17-year-olds. We're talking about 11 and 13-year-old are charged with murder in it. They set the fire. And my understanding is when they were in court, they're acting like kids. They're chewing on a spoon.
On which case is this?
The apartment fire in Lakewood.
Oh, in Lakewood, not this Green Valley, not this Green Valley one. You're talking about.
No.
Yeah,
I know about the Green Valley one.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about now. It's pretty recent. Yeah.
It's an 11-year-old and a 13-year-old, and when they're in court, they're there as children. They're chewing on spoons and they're not really paying attention. And what has gotten my attention with that case is there was consideration of trying them as an adult or as adults, and it was decided that they will be tried as juveniles. So then they're going to have a lesser sentence. They're going to be out probably still as young people in society. Will there be anything to address the issues that they have? Or will they come out as even more hardened criminals? And then if they are tried as an adult, their sentences are longer. They get out, in maybe their 40s, and we're still dealing with people who have been in a system that have hardened them further. So I know there's development of the brain to consider, and I listened to your explanation about how hard it is to try to, take a juvenile through the adult process.
Really hard for an 11-year-old.
I'm really mixed about it.
11-year-old's the floor in terms of prosecution. That is about the youngest we would ever do. And 11 years old is a kid. I agree with that. But, if you're thinking in terms of just what do we do about the kid and we're going to treat the kid, then it's easier to dismiss the idea that they engaged in an act that led to the death of other human beings, plural beings. So this is maybe the most difficult decision in some ways that a district attorney makes. And that is, what do you do with an 11, 12, or 13-year-old who kills multiple people? Because you can't get a worse outcome, right? And yet you can't have a more mitigated person that does that in terms of they're a sense of the world and awareness. And yes, brain development is legitimate at that age. So what do you do with them, Jennifer? What is the right answer for those kids, in your opinion?
I'm not sure. I've oscillated back and forth between, getting them through juvenile court and trying to treat the problem. And then, 2 people died here, and it was deliberately set. From what I understand, the accusation is that they deliberately set this fire. So there's intent there. And so part of me says, try them as adults and lock them away a little bit, because the penalty is that it should reflect the crime. But they need treatment too. Clearly they haven't been parented. They need somebody to intervene to try to instill, norms of a civil society in these kids. I don't know. I'm really torn.
I'm torn too. One of the things that we grappled with when I was DA is there was a case down at Mountain Vista High School, which is the high school just next to, and when I say next, just down the road really from my kids' schools. And there were 2 16-year-old girls, you may remember this, who plotted a Columbine-style mass shooting at that school. But it was derailed by some gutsy person who went to the text-to-tip, anonymous tip thing, and it got law enforcement involved, and one thing led to another, and we discovered the plot and the efforts, and we prosecuted them as adults, but we came up with what we thought was a very creative solution that was an attempt to say, this is so horrible, we've got to hang a giant anvil over your head for the future because we're going to roll the dice here. And so we ended up doing something called like a split plea, where we had them plead guilty to a certain level of offense that got them some out-of-home placement and incarceration as a juvenile. But then we hung over their head something called a deferred judgment on a big felony that carried mandatory prison. And we made the period of that deferred judgment super long. And so the way it worked is, if this person, and they're going to be out of home placement for years and they have to go through mental health treatment, but if they complete that and they get out, they still have this anvil hanging over their head. And had they reoffended really in any way, all of a sudden, boom, they're instantly convicted of, I can't remember which class charge, but it was a big one. And there would have been mandatory prison of a decade or more to follow on as a tail to that thing. And we thought it gave them the most appropriate incentive and the best shot at rehabilitation. So it wasn't a life ender, but it was an opportunity to get rehab that you can't get in prison. The juvenile system has far more resources available for things like that than the adult system. And if people are out there saying, don't you think that we should have, yes, I do, but that's not the reality we live in. One of those defendants, the attorney came to us and said, we are so uncertain about whether or not she can make it through the deferred judgment part of this. We would much rather just take a permanent adult felony conviction and be sentenced to prison for a fixed number of years for that. No joke. That's what they
Wow.
can't. And so that's what we ended up doing. And then the tragedy of this whole thing is that the one that we thought had the best chance of being rehabbed and making it And she did. And I was part of this call too. And asked her a bunch of questions. And I thought, she's rehabbed, right? Like, she has the best chance. She had a support mechanism on the outside. We agreed to make some changes to the sentence. She got out. And within 6 months, she took her own life. And it was just, man, it's one of those things where, as a DA, you can't be in a zero defect environment. You can't guess 100% right at the time. So my guess is Alexis King out there in Jeffco is making the best guess she can based on the best advice she's getting from everyone involved. And part of her has to be crossing her fingers, right? Because these kids are going to get out in probably 7 years at most, maybe a little bit more. I don't know. And she's got to cross her fingers that, my God, if they go out and do something else horrible, everybody's going to come back and say, this is Alexis King's fault. That's what they're going to say. It is one of the toughest decisions you can make as a prosecutor.
Well, you can't predict the future. I think that's what I love about that story, George, though, is the creativity in sentencing and a great use of deferred sentence. But you can't predict the future. You gave those, or, the system gave those two young ladies the best opportunity to turn it around, and it didn't go that way.
By the way,
that is unfortunate, but at least they had the chance.
The feedback from the public was the kind of feedback where I felt like we must have hit the sweet spot, because there were people who were like, I can't believe you're treating them like adults. And then there were other people that were like, you sissy. How can you not be sending them to prison? They were going to, and it's like, okay, I'm probably in the sweet spot here, which is, there's a bunch of loud voices on the edges telling me I'm wrong. I think I'm right there where I need to be. Well, look, Jennifer,
that's a great example.
Thanks for getting us kicked off on this conversation, as always. Great phone call. Jennifer's line is open, 303-696-1971. Keep this conversation going. Twofold, really. Can good parents produce bad kids? And if so, what do you do about that? What's the fix for that? And what's the right outcome here? When juveniles participate in murderous acts, what is the right answer? Neil, you're on 710 KNUS. What do you think?
Good morning, George. I'm going to ask you two questions, and I'm going to hang up and
Wait a minute, buddy.
The attorney who just called.
Neil, you can ask me questions, but you have to stick around for the conversation. You got to stick around.
Well, no. I trust your judgment. The first one is, what's your take on rehabilitation and recidivism in these juveniles that commit these acts? I mean, do you think we're wasting our time? What's the evidence that's crossed your desk in terms of is that possible, and are the sentences and rehabilitation and the way that the system is going about it the best option in your mind?
Jeez, well, listen, I do think it is appropriate that we treat kids like kids on the vast majority of offenses that they commit. I believe that, because they're kids, and I am a believer that rehabilitation has to be the first focus, but it can't be the focus to the exclusion of the other pieces of this. And yes, I do believe that juveniles can be rehabilitated. Not every one of them, but I do think the vast majority of them can be rehabilitated. I think the other thing that happens now in schools, Neil, and I've said this even as a prosecutor, in putting SROs in school has become something that as parents we want to see, because we're worried about Columbine and other things like that and the violence that juveniles can engage in. But when we do that, the risk that we take is that things that kids engage in that might in the past, when you and I were in school, would have been handled at the principal level, are now turning into summonses into court, and kids are having to get into the system. That, to me, is not appropriate, and it's not an effective way to use the juvenile justice system. I do think all those kids can be rehabilitated. I think the bigger question is, what percentage of those cases should have never come in the front door of court? That's a harder thing.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
What do you think? Hold on. What do you think about rehabilitating? We got a texture here that says you can never rehabilitate a murderer.
I'm not an attorney, and I've not dealt with this.
But you've dealt with kids, man. But Neil, you've dealt with kids.
But I think you presented a good balance to that, and I think that one of your underlying themes with your conversations recently is that the thresholds for what we consider crime in the state of Colorado have gone the wrong direction, and I'm curious about, okay, we need to maybe change this and say, look, if you steal something at this level, that's pretty serious, and I'm curious about how you think we affect change, because it looks like the state of Colorado, in terms of the legislature and the governor's office, is a runaway train going down the wrong track. So I'm curious about how you think we as citizens can affect change in this, and what our path ought to be, whether it's being more involved or contacting our legislators or just electing different people. I'm kind of curious
Neil,
about what
these
you think it'll take to right the ship.
Neil, this is, I love the question. Okay. This is something that we need to have a community-wide discussion with. And in no way is the fact that I was a district attorney or I'm an attorney put me in a better position to judge kids. I just have seen the worst of them and know what happens when they get in the sentence. And let's be candid about this too. The criminal justice system cannot fix society ever. The criminal justice system is the drain in your bathtub. And it catches all the other stuff that comes off of society that we couldn't figure out how to deal with in the way that we probably should have. If society were better about raising kids between the ages of 0 and 12, and I believe this, the crime rate would plummet. It would plummet. You would have district attorneys bored, walking around the office wondering, what are we going to do today? If we could figure out 0 to 12, we haven't figured it out. And frankly, maybe that's false. We know the right answers. We just refuse to try to encourage them or put them in place. And so you've asked my opinion. We have got to do more to encourage families to stay together. Any policies that exist that keep parents from raising kids together, unless they've shown that they can't do it safely for those kids or each other, we got to figure out a way. It's like Section 8 housing. I mean, how do you have a Section 8 housing policy where you discourage two parents from living together? When we give assistance to women with children, WIC and all that other stuff. We have got to be in the business of encouraging intact families. We've got to be in a position. Go ahead.
And I think, and I'll make this I'm going to be driving through a tunnel, so you may lose me. But I think one of the things that this gets at is the underlying issue of, and this is going to be a rough term, personal moral fiber, that the person has a sense of right and wrong. They have a sense of how they fit into society. They know how this functions, and I do think that comes from the home. And when you have a broken home, that's far less likely to occur.
The other thing that happens is that broken home tends not to be with rich people. It tends to be with people who are stuck in parts of town where the educational system fails them on a daily basis. It fails them. If you have a single mom working all the time, and I got a story about this I'll talk about in the 8 o'clock hour, fails to allow them the opportunity to parent in a way that would make a difference. You create an environment where kids get together and make ridiculous decisions that only kids make that turn out to end up being evil with significant consequences. And the educational system, I blame the educational system too. They are failing the lower socioeconomic portion of society. We've got to figure out a way to be better about education and give better educational opportunities to kids. And I'm just telling you, Neil, 0 to 12 is that spot. If we could figure out a way to do right by all kids 0 to 12, and that's probably a perfect standard we'll never hit. But if that's our focus, I'm telling you, the criminal justice system becomes a lonely, boring place to be. But we refuse to do it. Neil, hey, man, thanks for the call. Yeah, go ahead, sir.
And I agree, and thanks for your answers.
Thanks, bye-bye. Neil. Good luck on the drive. I appreciate the provocative questions, and we're going to continue this conversation. Give us a call. Neil's line is open, 303-696-1971. I promise, Alexa, Gina, we're going to get you on the phone, on the radio right after this. It's George Brockman on The George Show, 710 KNUS. Little Billy Idol right here on 710 KNUS. George Brockler back with you. Going to go to the phone lines. Give us a call. We're going to continue this conversation over the top of the hour. 303-696-1971. Alexa, you're on 710. What do you think? And what's the weather?
George, the weather's fabulous today. I'm not freezing to death.
It is pretty nice out there. Yeah. I would prefer, by the way, that be the answer from my Alexa. Like, the weather will be fabulous today.
It should be. It should be, shouldn't it?
What are you thinking about all this?
I have 20 points.
Oh,
so
my sweet goodness. We may end up having to put you on hold and carry for the next 10 into the next hour. So you're going to have to stick around.
No, I'm going to be very brief. So I think several people, you have made points, nature versus nurture. Good parenting, good family environment, I think, are heavy influencers on children growing up to do well. However, there's definitely examples where that has existed and it didn't turn out well. I think John Bolin, Jordan Hancock, to name a few.
Yeah.
Then there's also the kids that are just rule followers that, I don't know if you ever did Love and Logic Parenting, but they have a great story. And the essence of it is, if you as a parent aren't teaching your kid critical thinking skills, when they get in a situation that they haven't had to use critical thinking skills, they could make bad decisions because they're just a rule follower versus understanding why they follow rules and internalize them.
Pardon me, I think you're trying to tell me about Jeff. Jeff is a wicked smart kid, but he is a rule follower because he truly believes that, look, the law says this thing and I don't want to deviate from the law. We used to do these other things where there were books out there and they're for kids and they teach them character things. And at night, this fell off after they were, 9 or 10, but I used to go into their room and I would read them a story here or there. We'd talk about things. And I don't know if that's it, but that's got to be part of it. If you're in an environment where that's going on, that's got to matter.
Well, and I'll use your example. No, I wasn't actually picking on Jeff, but you gave the story this week about you and your brother with the bike.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And the not so good George Brockler.
That's right.
At some point between that incident and I assume when you got to be an adult, you didn't take someone's bike just because that's the right thing to do. I believe you probably went, gosh, this hurts someone.
Yeah, there is that part of it. And I'll tell you, that's the parents too. We went to church every weekend, and that's not a cure for anything, but it's a cure for some of the stuff. Alexa, I got to let you go unless you want to hang on for hold.
Hang on.
All right, we're going to put you on hold. Alexa's got a couple other points. And Gina, I promise we'll get to you and everybody else at 303-696-1971. George Brockler, George Show, 710 KNUS.
Want to take your favorite radio station wherever you go? Well, now there's an app for that. No matter where you are, stream your favorite shows. Tap the app to listen to podcasts. Talk back to your favorite local hosts.
At the tone, leave a message.
Call the show. Set your alarm. Enter contests and win prizes. All in the palm of your hand. Available now for iOS and Android devices in the App Store or Google Play. And best of all, it's free. Download today.
George Brockler back with you here on the George Show 710 KNUS. A quick reset here as we hit that halfway mark on the show before we turn it over to Charlie Kirk at 10 and then go live and local at 3 with Deb and 4 with Steven. We have been, and it just happened. Again, this is the radio thing. We've got these pre-planned topics, but I want to be honest that it's the listeners that drive the show. It isn't really me that drives the show. I start a conversation and you guys keep it going, and you have been. And I want to encourage you to do that at 303-696-1971. We have one line open. Again, to go to YouTube, man, and watch this. And you can see the conversation take place and my reaction and Billy nodding off behind the glass from time to time. But YouTube is the way to go. That is probably the future of a lot of this. But the best part of the show is when you text in and you call in, and we continue to get texts and calls. And it's about this. We've got a kid, and he's still a juvenile. I think he's on the road to 18, who just got sentenced yesterday out of Denver for participating in the mass murder of a family of 5 from Senegal, who were burned to death after a deliberate act of arson as a, I guess, revengeful act for what one of the members of this group of mass murderers believed was a family, or at least a house, that housed his phone, which he attributed to a robbery he'd been a victim of. And of course, he took matters into his own hands the way only criminal minds do, and set fire to it. Of course, he got the wrong house, and he burned to death 5 people, 5 innocent people. And that included a 2-year-old and a 6-month-old burned to death. And one of the participants, certainly it sounds like the least involved of them, and perhaps the youngest. I thought he was 17 based on the article I read, but many people here have corrected me and said 14, and that is a difference maker. He got sentenced to 10 years, apparently, and I could be wrong here, but apparently a combination of 7 years in big boy prison and 3 years in the Division of Youth Services leading up to that. And the real question is that justice? And what do you do with that? I had made the comment, and it just was a comment at the time, that I'm like, listen, that's only 1 year older than my son, Graham, my youngest. I could just never picture him doing anything like that. And I don't think good parenting would produce that. And of course, that got the text going and callers calling in to talk about that. So really the two issues we're exploring here, and this is real because this is going on every day. Somebody texted in about the murder of Pam Cabriales. If you'll remember, we had on her brother to talk about something. And I got to be honest, I think in part we helped derail what was happening. And that was they were going to treat the 18-year-old driver with a pretty kid glove sentence. And do you know what happened? They went to court, they hashed it out, and the judge rejected that plea bargain. Do you remember that? That's real too. And so we're having a conversation that isn't just theoretical in nature. It has real world right now implications. And so your input on this matters. And that is, look, what role does good parenting play in trying to protect society really from juveniles who make bad decisions and making good kids? And we were having that conversation with Alexa, and I'm going to go right back to the phones to have that conversation. Alexa, all of your children are in prison. How do you explain that? No, I'm kidding. I'm joking. Alexa.
They listen to the George Brockler show. So.
If only I could take credit. I'm sorry that we were in the middle of a great conversation when we had to cut away because, the FCC cuts us off at some point here. Make that point that you were making.
So I think that the two opposite ends of the spectrum, I will give you. You look at someone even worse. These younger kids, this is part of the argument why we don't let kids make decisions in their teens or, God forbid, in elementary school that are adult decisions, because they don't have the maturity. Some kids are immature and will make bad choices, but when they become an adult, then they become a very responsible person like yourself. But you look at people like Susanna Smith, drowning her 2 kids, a Patrick Frazee, locally, literally taking a bat to his fiance, killing her, and then, calling his girlfriend to help him dispose of her body and burn it. I mean, what makes those people so horrible that, probably before all that, they seemed to be decent people. And then on the other end, I look at the movie, The Pursuit of Happiness, where
that's a Will Smith thing before he slapped somebody.
Yeah, I know. The good old days. But he had everything going against him. He had every reason not to do good, but he did. What made him make the right choices? in those dire circumstances. So there will always be one-offs and not following the bell curve, but I do think the good, raising kids well, having two parents involved in their life, teaching them how to critically think, giving them good examples in life is extremely helpful. And then some people are just not good people.
I think that's true. I think the other thing that, without you saying it specifically, that's out there, that there is a growing portion of society that refuses to believe this, is that there is evil and there is good.
Yep.
And as much as we try to protect ourselves from the evil and even try to create situations where it won't exist, and religion is a big part of that, faith is a big part of that. It encourages you to know right from wrong and to choose right. And there's nobody yet who's been zero defect on that. Maybe Jesus, but even he was tempted from time to time. And so the reason I bring that up is, when you're willing to dismiss evil and how to treat evil, then it becomes far easier to excuse away conduct as the product of something else. And even though I think good parenting should be about teaching right from wrong, not this moral relativism that seems to have seeped into the educational system where you're wrong, maybe someone else is right. That's garbage, right? Like when you tell people that, under some circumstances, theft may be right. Theft is always wrong. It may be mitigated. There may be reasons that theft occurs that we say, hey, we don't think we want to punish you for that act. But to suggest that there are right times to steal sends the wrong message. We're just in this weird environment, Alexa, where I don't know what the right answer is, but I know what we've been doing right now seems to be failing us at an increasing rate.
Yep. No, perfect example. I don't know what people are doing with the high-end Nike shoes and designer purses when they, just break into the stores and take them. I mean, they're not stealing to put food on their table or that doesn't rectify anything with any death. Go steal something. We're in clown world or bizarre world.
I think we are too. This is, by the way, this conversation may end on the show today, but it doesn't end with what's going on out there. I mean, let me just, before we get to Gina and Frank and everybody else who's calling in right now, let me ask you the question that really Jennifer's call sparked, and that is, what do you do with that 11-year-old who engages in the intentional burning down of a building that results in the death of multiple people? And frankly, what do you do with the 14-year-old who did that here, who just got sentenced here? What do you do with that, Alexa?
I think they have to serve their time as a juvenile. Again, they may have made an impulse, immature decision, but if there are not consequences that are substantial enough, what's to deter future kids? I mean, if 11-year-old, they go, oh, you were in the right mind, we're going to just let you off the hook. Then what do you do the next time an 11-year-old does it? I mean, and we are seeing that. I mean, look at the car theft. That's what happens when people don't serve an appropriate punishment for wrongdoing in our society. And we are seeing the pendulum have swung the one way and needs to start swinging back. So yeah, I think spending time in juvie, then having an assessment as they turn into an adult. Are they rehabilitated? Are they going to be a good person? And I know that it's really hard. There's indicators, but it's still really hard to determine that. I don't know about putting them away for life, but
I agree. Not for life. But when you say the juvenile system, do you look at that and say, I think there's texters here that are texting in and say things like adult time for adult crime. But I don't know that I can get there on an 11-year-old. It's especially given the circumstances. There was some older kids. They not really a lot older, but some older. The 14-year-old, this from raising kids. The gap between 14 and 17 is huge. It's not like the gap between 50 and 53 where very little changes. 14 to 17 is ridiculously big. So I want them to be held accountable too, but I think our conversation has to be, what is the appropriate amount of accountability? And on those ones, it is really difficult. I think it's too easy to say, lock them up and throw away the key. I don't feel that way. But at the same time, the juvenile system sufficient? Is that enough?
I think we just have to. The biggest problem is everybody's an individual, and it is very hard to come up. I mean, you probably know with your own kids. One kid does something wrong, you can look at them with the death stare. They know, you don't have to say a word. Another kid does something wrong and they have to be grounded or something for them to get the idea that this is not a good idea to keep doing this. So
it's true.
Individuals.
It's true. Even in the same household, they're all different. I feel pretty blessed. I don't want to jinx this. I feel pretty blessed that these 4 kids have all been just so good in their heart. And so much of that has to do with their mom, but they've just been raised right. You know what I mean? Like they just know right from wrong, and they make the decision, not 100% of the time, but enough that it matters to make the right decision on small things and big. And I think, this idea of this broken window theory of criminal justice in the community, I think that's true for kids too. And I'm not talking about a lack of mercy. I'm saying if you don't early on encourage them to look out for the little things, then they lose sight of the right and wrongness of the big things. You can't just focus on, hey, I'm going to teach you not to kill another person, and that's it. You got to focus on the little things as well. And maybe we've done that too well with Jeff, but I don't know. But with the speed limit stuff, it's just crazy. But I do think that matters.
Yeah, it's put the shopping cart back in the corral. Open the door for someone.
Open the door for someone. Alexa, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. Just teaching them to respect other human beings that they just don't know. It's just because they're another human being.
Yeah.
You are so right. Even small gestures like that matter.
Yep, they do. They absolutely do.
Alexa, thanks for the great phone call. You've gotten us going down another different direction here, which I love. Alexa's line is open, 303-696-1971. Gina, you've been so patient hanging on. What do you think about all this?
So I'm the one who texted you about, not all good parents or good parents.
Yeah. Right. Well, thank you for calling in.
Yeah, sure. So, and then there was someone that texted in that said murders can't be rehabilitated.
That's right. Someone texted in and said that.
And there's examples everywhere of murderers that have been rehabilitated. I mean, I know of a doctor who in the late 60s or 70s, when he was a teenager, I think killed his parents here in Colorado.
Yikes.
And he went on to medical school and became, was a physician, got into residency, completed that. I mean, the CEO of Nike.
Well, so where does that put your head and your heart on this issue then? Like, what do you do with the 14-year-old who participates with the older kid in the mass murder of 5 innocents, or the 11-year-old out in Jeffco who deliberately, what do you do with them? What do you think the right outcome is?
I'm not really sure. I kind of have a dog in the fight. I had a son, I'm a 2-parent household, still married. We had a son who at 13, between 12 and 13 made some bad decisions. I mean, not at the level of murdering someone, but, got kind of hung out with the wrong kids and had a little bit of peer pressure and got into some trouble. So, I don't think of, there's studies that show that a male brain does not fully develop till they're in their 20s.
Well, some will say until 54. Some have said that. I don't know if that's true yet because I'm not there.
Maybe. But I have a lot of mixed emotions. I mean, at one end, it's not enough time for killing those people. Like that's
right.
Horrible.
That's right.
But then, I get into this mom of a boy that's been through it. And then, it's just heartbreaking. It's just heartbreaking all the way around.
It's heartbreaking. It is. But now we're stuck with a system and we call it the criminal justice system. But let's be honest, there are cases out there, and they're always the worst ones, where there can never be true justice, right? Like you can never give back what was taken. You can never fix what was broken. I mean, these are things. And then we have this, it's not even a toolbox. We have a hammer that we give people, and we have different sized hammers, and we say, go fix this thing. And you can't. And so you're stuck here struggling with what you're struggling with, Gina, and I am too. And that is, what in the hell is justice, right? Like, do we undervalue their lives by not sentencing this kid to a longer period of time? Or do we undervalue the crime? Or do we undervalue the 11-year-old by saying, because you did this thing at a time when your brain clearly doesn't work the way it's supposed to, right? Like, it's a kid brain. It's not working like an adult brain. We're just going to lock you up and throw away the key. Is that justice as well, to throw that life into prison forever? And if you only focus on the damage they've done, you say yes. But if you only focus on the 11-year-old, you come up with a sentence where we go, but what about the people he murdered? I mean, this is incredibly difficult. And with that, Gina is stumped. No, what?
Sorry,
It's
I got you on mute. It is very difficult. It's very difficult. I don't think a 11-year-old should be locked away and, with the key thrown away and never see them again, or even 40 years, because then they do become conditioned. They do become, they're educated by the prison system. Do we really want that?
No. No, I don't think the prison system is great at rehabilitation. It's not completely ineffective. It provides opportunities and resources. But for the people that go there, if you just look at our parole failures, and I mean real parole failures, the system sucks at rehabilitation. It is not good at creating an environment where people who've made bad decisions before stop making bad decisions. And again, some people are going to complain and say, well, that's because they can't go get I don't care. I don't care if they can ever get employed again, from the standpoint of, you are obligated to live within the confines of the law. And if we start excusing their failures as, well, the system doesn't treat them well enough, I don't think that gets us to a safer community either. The reality is that we need to put more resources into the front end of all of these lives, and then we won't have to put as many into the prison part of this thing. But we refuse to figure out the right way to do this.
Yeah.
Gina, thanks for the great phone call. I appreciate the opportunity to continue this conversation. It's great. Thank you. And thanks for listening. Gina's line is open, 303-696-1971. Frank, everybody else that's calling in, and there is a line open. It is Gina's. Give us a call. Let's keep having this conversation. What is justice here? What do you do with a juvenile mass murderer? 11-year-old, 14. What do you do with them? Not the 17 and 360-day-old, but no, I'm talking about the kids. What is justice here in these situations? 303-696-1971. You may have heard, but there's something big and kind of awesome going on if you're a Second Amendment person. And frankly, I know that it touches upon a whole bunch of issues that we're sort of flirting with here with this discussion. But when I'm talking about you as an adult and your right to defend yourself and the ones that you love and your home, guess what's coming this weekend, folks? It is the Tanner Gun Show. That is the granddaddy of them all. And look, I'm a veteran. I'm a former prosecutor of a giant jurisdiction that had a ton of violent crime. I'm telling you that if you're thinking to yourself, I can't count on the system to provide the kind of immediate response to threats in my home, to me and my family, I want to do something about it. Or maybe you're not even thinking that. Maybe you're just thinking, I like guns. I like to collect them. I like to shoot them. I like marksmanship. I like hunting. Tanner Gun Show is the place for you to go. It's at the Crown Plaza. The home protection options you just can't find everywhere else. The hard to find used guns, knives, ammo, AR accessories, hunting supplies. They got the concealed carry classes, and you got to take those, folks. Do the concealed carry class. Just a ton of cool stuff. Over 600 vendor tables that are there. You can get up to 30% off of what you can get in the big box stores for these same exact things. So here's the deal. Starts tomorrow, Friday, 3 to 7, Saturday, 9 to 5, Sunday, 10 to 4. And your ticket is good for all 3 days. You don't have to get it all done at once. Go to Tanner Gun Show, not the TannerGunShow.com. You can also get the tickets at the door the day that you choose to go there. And remember, parking is always free at Crown Plaza. That's TannerGunShow.com, TannerGunShow.com. When we come back, Frank and a whole bunch of texts and everyone else calling in, I promise we'll get to you. It's George Brockler on the George Show, 710 KNUS.
Want to take your favorite radio station wherever you go? Well, now there's an app for that. No matter where you are, stream your favorite shows. Tap the app to listen to podcasts. Talk back to your favorite local hosts.
At the tone, leave a message.
Call the show. Set your alarm. Enter contests and win prizes. All in the palm of your hand. Available now for iOS and Android devices in the App Store or Google Play. And best of all, it's free. Download today.
710 KUS. Phone lines have been very, very active, as have the texts. Here's one. This is one of the most tragic events I've ever heard. Beyond the Channel 9 News assassination of Lee Keltner, we prosecute children and dismiss adult money, power, and influence. What is justice? Now, the interesting common denominator amongst these cases in the Lee Keltner one is they've all been handled by the same prosecutor's office. Also, interestingly, the same prosecutor that handled the Green Valley arson and mass murder of 5 is also the person that was handling the Pamela Cabrialis case. I don't read anything into that other than to say that, there is a common thread through some decisions that get made in different jurisdictions. And that common thread could either be driven by law enforcement who investigates the case, but more likely than that, it's the prosecutor's office. And again, these are some of the hardest decisions that you make. And that's why we're having this conversation. I'm frustrated with a system that has been created that would take a cold-blooded 17-year and 365-day-old or 364-day-old murderer of maybe 10 people and puts them in a position to be parole eligible at about 25 years of sentence. That is incredibly frustrating to me. But it's also, there's complicating factors here. 11-year-old, damn, I don't know. I mean, that's just a kid. That's a 5th grader, man. An 11-year-old? Got to be held accountable, but what do you do with them? I mean, I'm putting you in the shoes of the district attorney. What do you do with that 11-year-old in Jefferson County who the DA's office has chosen to treat like a juvenile? Is that right or wrong? How about the 14-year-old? Got prosecuted as an adult by the Denver DA's office, but is given a sentence of at best 10 years on paper, but there's no chance it's 10 years in reality for 5, including a 2-year-old and a 6-month. Is that sufficient? Is that justice? And where are these kids coming from? Is good parenting the solution? And I know it's not 100% guarantee, but is it the solution? Another text, are you willing to gamble to rehabilitate a murderer and let him into society with the lives of other possible victims? Why gamble with the lives of the community? Listen, I'll say this. And there are studies out there, the vast majority of murderers that are in there do not pose a risk to other folks, because the reason they kill is specific to the individual that they murder, right? Like especially a lot of the domestic violence ones and some others. But whether or not they can be rehabilitated, I don't care. Whether or not they pose a risk to the community, I don't care. If you're an adult and you murder someone, you take away their life after deliberating on it, and you have the intent to do it, I just don't care. Now for me, it's pure justice, pure punishment. Go to prison forever. Bye-bye now. That's the only answer in my mind for first-degree murder and under those circumstances. It's not about rolling the dice with the community. But the truth is, the majority of these murderers pose no risk to others. But do you care? I don't. If we're focused on the offender, then we try to say, well, maybe murder should be punished by 20 years. I disagree completely, but I'm telling you, that's where this legislature wants to go. They want to go and downshift first-degree murder into life for only those who would have otherwise been eligible for death. And then they want to have parole eligibility for everybody else. I promise you, that's what's going on behind the scenes. That is what they're trying to work towards. And they would do it this year if they thought they could. 303-696-1971. Want to honor the callers. Frank, you're on 710 KNUS. Frank, what do you think?
Hey, George, I think you and Billy have one of the best shows around. I like your open format where you take on all comers, like a martial artist taking on the world.
I keep getting beat.
Yeah, well, no, I think you bring up some interesting questions. Unfortunately, you guys have more questions than answers, and in that sense, you become philosophers then. But that's always the problem when I read philosophy. They raise more questions than they answer. But what I would like to do is maybe encourage you to try to make some law that the Colorado House and Senate should pass a law that there would be a Democrat of the day who would be anointed to be forced to listen to the George Brockman show every day.
What kind of torture would that be for them?
That's right. And then they would be forced to wrestle with these weighty things. But I'm sure they will always come up with an answer, and go back down and make some law. But on the subjects of one of these things you raised about what should we do and the problems, I'm glad you made a comment about the criminal justice system is not the answer. It's just the exit system.
We're the drain, man. We're the drain.
To get them out. And I go back to biblical. Raise up a child in the way that he should go, and when he's old, he will not depart from it. So there's a lot of wisdom in that, unless there's some pathology there. And your point about the person who is murdered is kind of like a pit bull. Once they've got these genetics, they're going to, when certain triggers hit them, they're going to do it. And you almost have to exit them from society. And I think the numbers probably bear that out, that they're small amounts. But, you know, of course, then you got Khalil Gibran, the prophet. Do you ever read that?
No.
Oh, it's a great book. It's called The Prophet by Khalil Gibran. And he
Spell that last name, Frank. I'm going to write it down.
G-I-L-B-R-A-N. And he posits that, he says, children are like arrows shot from a bow. They come through us, but they're not from us. When they go out, they're bantered about by the winds of life, and the arrow can go in different areas. But I think what you provide is a narrower spectrum trying to hit the target, and the target is set forth by your prophet choice, Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad, or whatever, and trying to, these are the goals of a good life. And then you have to surround them with good books, you know, I think, like the Bible, and I think Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And the other one I like is that one, what's his name? M. Scott Peck, The Road Less Traveled.
Yeah.
And that's a really good book.
Frank, I'm going to take a look at this, the Prophet book too, but it strikes me throughout these conversations that maybe the core value, if that's the right word, if the core value that we seem to have lost sight of is respect for other people. And I don't just mean their views or their opinions. That's certainly part of the conversation, but I mean for their lives. And I think in some regard, that is because of our waning reliance and commitment to faith. And I'm not proselytizing here, but whether you're a Christian or, you know, you practice Judaism or Islam, there's one common thread, and that is life is divine, and that it is not just some amalgamation of cells that seem to be able to move and function and dream and think, that this comes from a deity, a God, and that therefore it has intrinsic value, regardless of where you come from, regardless of what part of a caste system you are, that it has value. And the further we've gotten from just that idea, that life should be respected. And even Alexa sort of alluded this with just opening the door for another person, just that sense of respect for another member of the community. The easier it is, I think, for us to rationalize doing horrific, horrible things, whether it's at a young age or an older one, to another person. The road rage thing, right? Like that's just a disrespect for life.
That's a very, very important point. And I think that the Democrats also value human life. I just think they have gone away from biblical to secular, and when they go away, they have to redefine what some of their answers are for these weighty problems, and then that's where you start justifying all these behaviors. But in the bottom line, a behavior past a certain point of seriousness towards your fellow man is a bad thing, and if it's done once, it'll probably be repeated.
I think that there are folks out there probably listening now, and some texters that'll text in and that'll reference abortion. They'll reference euthanasia. And I think those are legitimate things to discuss in this context when life becomes a matter of, well, it's worth protecting if I want it, but it's not worth protecting if I don't. I mean, little subconscious things like that, I imagine, take place out there. You know, the euthanasia piece, I'm also conflicted with that too. I don't want anybody to unnecessarily suffer. But once you've made the decision that life is yours to decide to do with as you choose, and you disconnect it from this idea that it has some other intrinsic value broader than just yourself, you invite people to conclude that life is less valuable than I think we ever have at any point in our lives. And it doesn't mean we're a horrible people. I'm not saying that. I think we're creating,
societal things, though, like the games that the kids are playing, and you know, something, Grand Theft Auto and this, that, and the other, and it's, you know, those kind of things. But you're right. We should elevate life and try to live it to a higher plane. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, what led you to go into the prosecutorial side of medicine, of the law, and to be a prosecutor and go after all these heavy legal questions?
Yeah, that's a great question, man, because anybody that knew me in high school would have thought you're more likely to be in the system than working the system. And I look back on that too. As a kid, I made some ridiculously horrible decisions that had I been busted by the cops, I don't know where my life goes. I mean, I'm very sensitive to that. But at the end of the day, and I mentioned this yesterday on the show when we were talking about the movie stuff, in part, it was the household I grew up in. You know, my mom was one of the chief investigators for the Office for Civil Rights. And so her career was dedicated to fighting for the little guy. Like when hospital systems excluded Native Americans from them for reasons of payment and other stuff, my mom would show up all 5'1" of her and crush the hospital and bend them to the will of the law, which is you won't discriminate based on their ability to pay or who they are. And so I grew up with those stories, you know, and I grew up in that household. And then I see The Elephant Man when I'm 11 years old with my dad. And I remember feeling so hurt to my core that this guy who just looked horrible and looked different than everybody else was treated as less than the man that he really was on the inside. All of these things probably led to that. And made me make that decision. And then when I found I could combine whatever that value set was with a bizarre ability to just run my mouth and convince people of things, that made prosecution seem like an obvious place to go.
Well, I think you made a good decision. I think you've influenced in a good, positive way a lot of people, and you're certainly doing that now with your radio program. You have the ability to bring some of these ideas to people and let them have a voice.
Well, I hope we do. And Frank, as always, I appreciate the kind words and I love the conversations with you because you always bring up something intriguing. I hope that's true. I imagine there's a bunch out there who are rolling their eyes thinking either that dude is too hard or too soft. And I'm trying to Goldilocks this thing and find what's just right. But, you know, I love the conversations that we have. I don't know of any other radio show that does it like we do it.
No others do it. Check out that book, The Prophet, and get one for each of your kids.
Yeah, I'll do it. I'm going to take a look at it. I hope it has pictures. Frank, thank you so much for the call as always. 303-696-1971. Listen, there are texts here, a bunch of them coming in. I'm going to read them, process, and we'll talk about them. And then if I can, I want to get till we get to the top of the hour, this story I want to tell you about a guy named Wayne Thomas in terms of the rehabilitation piece. People have been asking, can they be rehabilitated? I want to tell you about Wayne Thomas when we come back. And then in the 9 o'clock hour, we're going to be joined by Aurora City Council woman, Françoise Bergan. Something pretty cool again going on. It's different than what we're talking about now. Pretty cool going on in the city of Aurora. They are going to be the beacon of light, I think, for other municipalities to follow. Stick around. George Brockler on The George Show at 710 KNUS.
Want to take your favorite radio station wherever you go? Well, now there's an app for that. No matter where you are, stream your favorite shows. Tap the app to listen to podcasts. Talk back to your favorite local hosts.
At the tone, leave a message.
Call the show. Set your alarm. Enter contests and win prizes. All in the palm of your hand. Available now for iOS and Android devices in the App Store or Google Play. And best of all, it's free. Download today.
It be me, George Brockler, right back with you here on the George Show, 710 KNUS. I'll be honest, I just love the participation of the listeners here on this show. As you know, they're not always in agreement. In fact, sometimes some of the best conversations we have are not with people in agreement. But this kind of a topic, I don't know that there's an absolute right or wrong answer. But it's one that we're going to continue to see in the papers and hear about on TV and on the radio for the foreseeable future. This stuff isn't going to end with this conversation, but maybe we can get to a better place where we can better understand what's going on and be willing to take some different, less than knee-jerk reactions to it. Here's one. Why aren't parents being held accountable? It's a great question, but what do you do? I mean, I am sold on the idea that good parenting has a positive impact on society in general, including creating kids who are less likely to engage, but not impossible to engage in violent, horrible crimes. But what do you do then with parents who I mean, do you try the parents? Do you go back and make part of the case? How did you raise them? Did you ever spank them? What was your discipline? What values did you teach them? Or do you simply say, if a kid below a certain age commits a crime, parents are on the hook? I'm not willing to go down that road, because I do think good parents who do everything right can still have a kid who does something horrific. I think the chances of it are less, but I don't know. Here's another one. Adult crime, adult time. We've seen that before. I'd like to see a study of brain scans done on these kids. Curious if there is some percentage of a physical issue in the brain. You know, I think that goes back to the brain development stuff. And while I think that's real, I think the idea here, we're rapidly moving towards a place where, you know, the legislature has just increased eligibility for this juvenile program for murderers and whatnot to get out early on an accelerated parole program. They've expanded it from 16 and 17 all the way up to through 20. They wanted to go to 24, but that became a little politically dicey. It isn't anymore, not given who's in the legislature and who's in the governorship. Maybe we'll see that as well. But I just disagree. If at 18 years old, we're going to let you pick who your governor and your sheriff and your president are, we're also going to hold you accountable for the other decisions that you make. If you want to treat them like kids for purposes of the worst things they do, they shouldn't be able to vote. That's my opinion. Maybe we shouldn't let them sign contracts, because we do. Maybe we shouldn't let them do things like buy cigarettes, or even at 21, buy cigarettes or guns or alcohol or weed. You want to treat people like juveniles, you do it across the board, not just for the most horrific things that they've done. George, when the system culture teaches our children they are nothing but animals, then why are we surprised that they behave like animals? After all, animals kill without remorse. I'm not sure what you're going for there, listener. I mean, text in and call and clarify that. What do you mean the system teaches our children they are nothing more than animals? Tell me what you mean by that, because my mind can go a couple different directions there, and I'm not sure it's the direction you want me to go. Sadly and proudly, people act so surprised when they encounter my kids in the service industry. For example, we order at a restaurant and my girls order for themselves and use please and thank you. They hold doors. They get up for senior citizens when waiting for something, and they are in a seat. So many times waitresses, patrons in restaurants and other places come to them and say thank you for their good manners. I love that story, and you are highlighting a huge deficit in every succeeding generation that we don't do it. But you know, texter and listener, where this comes from, and it comes from mom and dad. If you model that behavior when they're young, they will follow that behavior. And when they don't, if you insist that they do, I can't tell you how many times I've turned when these boys were younger and say, hold the door, please, hold the door. And sometimes it's for other people, but sometimes it's for mom or it's for dad. Hold the door for another person. And you encourage them to think beyond that moment and how it impacts them. That's a great text. Manners matter. And this is, again, goes back to what I talked to Alexa about. We focus so much on how do we convince kids not to kill each other. You can't lose sight of the fact that it's the little things that support the decisions on the big things as well. Here's one. The phrase that circulated around our house on several occasions was, it's not about the cookie. The story references when my son, at probably 4 or 6 years old, took an extra cookie and lied about it. We re-referenced that incident for the rest of his life so far, and his sisters. Later on, as they got older, now 23 and 19, but in their teens, it starts with the cookie. If you don't get that right, eventually the stakes are much higher, and you enter your response with, your honor, I'd like to say. Getting in significant trouble was never about the cookie. Brilliant text and a brilliant point that echoes what I was just trying to say. You did a much better job with that story. It is the little thing. And it's not about the cookie. It was about the theft part and bigger than that, the lying part of it. And you're right. It's the small things. And I'm not saying, and I think this texter isn't saying go crush them for every little thing they do. You don't beat them for every time they make a mistake, but there has to be some acknowledgement of what was wrong, a discussion of it, and some level of accountability, whatever that is. And we don't do that anymore. For youthful offenders, I think a major influencer is the peer group. Oh my God, that's so smart. Parents should be vigilant on peer group influence as much as they can. Often this is a tipping point for what the activity. That's brilliant too. I've worried to death that my kids will fall in with the wrong group. And I'm so thankful for the friend groups that I fell in with. The Johnny O's, the Corys, that became my best buddies in high school. That is such a difference maker because they were good kids too. The game came from good families. And we held each other accountable at a different level. I've told this story on air before, but I'm going to say it again. I have never, ever, never smoked marijuana, never done a gummy, never any kind of illegal or illicit drug. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But there was one time, and we were at a high school party, and yes, I drank underage. I did a lot. Huge mistake. I don't ever want my kids to go down that road, but I did. But I drew the line at drugs. There was one particular party where it was being broken up, not by the cops, but it was just dispersing. People were going different places. And man, I had my drink on. And there were some buddies of mine who I saw behind this one truck, and they were lighting up their doob. And they were like, hey man, come on over here and partake. And I was like, nah, I don't kind of do that. And they're like, look, man, just one hit, just, blah, blah, blah. And because of my drunken state, I was like, you know what? I'm interested. Maybe and I start walking over there, and who shows up at just the right time? My buddy Corey. And my buddy Corey grabs me by the hand and is like, hey, man, no, hey, we got to go somewhere else. We're going to go a different direction. And just turns me away. And we went and walked a little bit and got into a car with a sober person and drove away. And I remember thinking, I was just sober enough that I remember thinking, thank God, man, I have good friends that know to pull me out of just the little things at the time. And man, the good friends thing really matters. It's a big deal to me. Listen, before we get to the caller, and I need to do this, I need to tell you about a guy who knows right from wrong and stands up for the side of right every time. And that's Dan Caplis, friend of the show, friend of mine, my former boss. I praise this guy all the time for the good work that he does on behalf of those people that he represents. And I'm encouraging you, if you're in a position to try to figure out how to move forward after somebody hurts you or a loved one, either by negligence, recklessness, maybe even intentional conduct in some circumstances, it's Dan Caplis and Babar Wahid. That's who you go to. They know right. They're on the side of right. And if you need someone to champion your cause against the big guy, against the insurance company with the seemingly limitless resources, and you want someone that has a proven track record of victory in those circumstances, it's Dan Caplis. Now, you can reach him at dancaplisLaw.com. That's Caplis with a C, dancaplislaw.com. But honestly, make the free phone call, 303-770-5551, 303-770-5551. There's only one person to call, and it's Dan Caplis. I'm going to get to the phone lines here. Is it Rodeo Doc? You're on 710. What do you think, sir? Well, I've got a whole minute for you. You can take it all.
Well, I probably won't need it all, George. And yes, it's Rodeo Doc. I sent the text about teaching our children are animals.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, man. Yeah. Tell me what you mean by that, because I don't want to misconstrue it.
So.
Oh, buddy, we're losing you. We're losing you on the call. We're losing you on the call. Are you in Parker?
No, I'm in Larkspur, headed south.
Say what you were going to say again.
Okay, no. The system, we've agreed that we're going to teach our children they're nothing but animals, that they evolve from slime over time.
I see what you're saying. Okay.
And when you teach, whether you teach good or evil, you get the product you're teaching. And it's just as simple as that. We should not be surprised when our children behave like animals, because we've taught them to be animals, that they are nothing more than the product of time plus slime.
And it sounds to me like you are alluding to a break from faith as well, that they don't come from anything divine. They're not special. They're just another animal out there. Is that what you're saying?
Well, yeah, they're nothing special. You're just an animal. And yes, it is a break from faith, because you look at this 11 years old, he's able to understand thou shalt not murder.
Buddy, I love the call. And now I'm so glad you called in to clear that up. Thank you. Hey, we're going to have Françoise Bergan coming up. George Brockler, 710 KNUS. George Brockler back with you here for the final hour of the George Show on this Thursday, 2/2/23. You can check us out, of course, on the app, which is the best way to listen, in my opinion, only because it's just a clear signal. But if you do, even if you don't, you can text us from there. We get tons of texts. We can also do the emails at 710knus.com. And then you can check us out on YouTube, which I'm waving to right now. Search for 710 KNUS, the George Brockler Show. Subscribe it, like it, love it. Send it around to folks and friends and be part of this little community of the town square that we have. And to really try to encourage conversations about things that show up as like a little one-off article here, there, or everywhere else. And we get the smart ones, folks. Here's the proof. There was an article in the Denver Gazette about something that is going on in Aurora that involves a ton of money that had been allocated by the American Rescue Plan. And the reason it became noteworthy is there are some decisions that have been made that are being reconsidered. And maybe the best person to speak to about that is, in many ways, one of the most influential members of that city council out there in Aurora, and that is Françoise Bergan. Thanks for joining us on 710.
Thank you, George. Wow, that's a nice compliment.
Well, you know it's true. I mean, I see Dustin and Danielle and Steve the Beard turning to you so many times up on that thing. So, and you've been doing this at a high level for a long time. Before we start talking about this, just tell folks the part of the city that you represent.
Okay, well, I represent the southeast part of Aurora, and I have about 70,000 residents. So it's pretty much some of the neighborhoods around the Quincy Reservoir, and then I go over to E470, everything east and south of Quincy, all those neighborhoods.
My gosh, 70,000. That feels like that's bigger than like a state house seat.
I know, bigger than some of our cities in Colorado.
Yeah, that's a good point too. Now, I teased this topic a little bit, but I'm hoping that you'll kind of set the stage for us and tell us, in a recent meeting, there was sort of a revisiting, if you will, of some decisions that had been made. I think it was last year. If it was the year before, let me know. But last year, about how to distribute to certain nonprofits monies, millions that were provided to Aurora through the American Rescue Plan Act. Tell us what's going on.
Sure. So actually, we've been allocated monies from the American Rescue Plan. Several years ago, we were allocated, I want to say $65 million.
Wow.
So we've already allocated a lot. Actually, the majority of that money has already been allocated through various workshops and study sessions that we've had over the last couple of years. Some of them, went to business grants, security grants for business, other infrastructure projects, and so forth. But we also allocated $2.5 million to go towards nonprofits. We also actually last fall allocated $5 million to homeless projects. So there's a lot of money to go around. The nonprofits is, it's a little bit different. We're used to dealing with the city budget and road infrastructure and police and fire and libraries and that type of thing. So when this came about, our staff had to come up with criteria for what nonprofits could apply, and then they put together a team to evaluate those nonprofits. They did come back and narrow it down for us. It's such a complicated area in terms of vetting these nonprofits and making sure that not only, are we going to make sure that our taxpayer monies are spent responsibly on programs that will actually benefit our residents, but we had to go through and just make sure that, that they were viable as well. And so, unfortunately, we did delay this a couple of times because we needed more information, but I'm not going to apologize for delaying and asking for more information to make sure that the monies go to the right organizations. We, just so you know, because of course, everybody said, oh, you didn't fund, X amount of nonprofits, but we did also that night fund quite a few nonprofits.
Now,
so it's not like we're not funding them.
No, but to be clear, then, so in 2022, were monies either allocated or suggested for these different nonprofits, and now this is just a delay in that final vote piece, or is it different than that?
No, it was presented to council in a study session, and then we delayed it because we wanted more information.
Francoise, your phone is breaking up just a little bit. If you could grab hold of a fence or something. I'm kidding. I'm making it up. But just
is this better?
It's much better. Much better.
Okay. Yes. No, it came to us in a study session, presentations from our staff. However, we felt that we needed to delay it to get more information. So I had asked that they come back with the operating budgets, which they did. And I went through the operating budgets, and I just, they fell short of my expectations in terms of, some of them were very elementary operating budgets and did not really tell the story as to how they were going to spend those funds. A lot of it went to personnel costs. A couple of them were like 70%.
Listen, I love this story because here you are playing the role of a steward of taxpayer money that it would be easy to just shrug and be like, well, these are all federal dollars that came our way. They can go, it doesn't, it's not really impacting us in a meaningful way. I love that you did the deep dive, ask for more information, actually review the information, and then you discover that some of these organizations are spending 70% of those taxpayer dollars on staff salaries. Only 30% is going to other things that are actually going to do something. That's crazy.
Well, I didn't think it was, I didn't think it was right to allocate monies to some of those. Now, I'll have to say, in all fairness, there was not enough detail on their programs either. So some of them were based out of Denver. We did not exclude organizations that were outside of Aurora from applying. Now, maybe shame on us, I don't know, but we are very close to Denver, so it, in some cases it makes sense that we're losing you again. Oh goodness!
Sorry, now you're back.
Okay, I'm not going to move. I was saying that we did not exclude any organizations that were outside the city of Aurora. So we had some Denver organizations, and again, they may be serving the population of Aurora, and that's what we had to make sure that we were looking at. We couldn't tell really from the background information that we were given how many they were serving in Aurora, what exactly their program, was doing to benefit us. It's just a lot of questions that were unanswered.
Have they since answered them? I mean, or did they? I'm interested to know the reaction. Like, were they frustrated? Like, come on, this works in Denver, or like, come on. I mean, what was the response?
No, we probably frustrated staff because I think they thought, they did spend a lot of time going through the RFP process and so forth. And maybe it's our fault that we didn't define the criteria tightly enough. And going forward, when we, if we fund any more, I think we will do that. We will put some expectations and some parameters that will maybe help staff in knowing what we are expecting as a council. A few of the organizations were churches, and a few of them were advocacy organizations. And so, sometimes I feel like that's a little bit of a conflict of interest and separation of church and state. I'm all for churches helping our residents, but asking for monies from the government, for things that were not necessarily defined as a benefit.
Well, one of the other things that came out of this article is it had to do with council members Marcano, who I think wants to be mayor, and Coombs. And they were pressing you on some questions about general and sweeping, and it could be a little bit embarrassing to those organizations, blah, blah, blah. One of the things that was stressed was that these organizations could seek ARPA grants again, and that the city has until 2026 to use the money. As the outside taxpayer guy who doesn't understand how it all works, it seems to me that the need for the ARPA funds doesn't exist anymore, right? Like, we're past the pandemic. We're past that big thing. We're dealing with normal economic contractions and interest rate related. Is there a need to distribute ARPA funds anymore, or can they just be sent back to the federal government and say, how about spend down some of that damn deficit?
If we send it back, it's going to go into a black hole. So I think what would be better for us to do is, again, we did fund, I don't know, about 15 of the nonprofits. So we did fund a considerable amount of them. I think with the funds that were not expended, that we would look at spending those elsewhere where it is critically needed. Some of the funds, we could have used towards, again, more towards businesses to get them viable, and many of our businesses were just decimated during the pandemic. Other funds could be used for infrastructure projects. So I think with whatever funds we have remaining, we need to take a really hard look at how we want to spend those monies.
Listen, I like this approach. At the end of the day, where does it leave those nonprofits who are expecting funding but have not yet had it approved? Is it delayed? Do they have to restart the process? Is it a future vote? How does it work?
Well, no, some of them were completely denied. So at Monday's meeting, we approved, like I said, around 15 of them. Some of them were a no vote and a majority no vote. So they will not be getting funding. A few of them, one of them I think was continued. And a few of them may come back to us again. And again, like I said earlier, I think we tighten the criteria of what we want. But we have to make a decision if we're going to even consider giving money to more nonprofits, or we're going to use it for other uses.
I'm interested that it wasn't a unanimous vote. What was the pushback and first off, 9 members of Aurora City Council, do you know what the vote breakdown was? And for those that voted differently, like, no, let's still give the money for the people who are spending it on staffing, what was their position on this?
Their position was that they would they wanted it continued. I think they wanted those that we were opposing continued so that they could have the applicant of the grant program basically come and speak to us and justify why their program needed the money. But that's not how it works. I mean, it was not a public hearing where you can go back and forth. This was a decision to be made by council as to up or down, yes or no, are we going to fund that organization or not? And we have public invited, so certainly the applicant could have been there to speak during public invited prior to the agenda item. I think maybe only one organization had people that spoke on behalf of the organization. So I think Councilmember Gardner made the point that if you really wanted to make sure that your organization was funded, it was your responsibility to be there.
I'm telling you, I don't know why this was controversial at all. When I say controversial, I don't mean to make it more than it is, but it generated an article in the Gazette, in one of the major papers we have in the city, in part because it feels like it was a bit unexpected, but also because it's anomalistic. It seems like in many of the things that you guys are doing out there in Aurora, you are taking an approach that just about everybody that would look at it would go, that makes total sense. And yet we don't see it replicated everywhere else. What I don't know is how other city councils, let's say in Denver, have appropriated tens of millions of ARPA dollars to other nonprofits. But what we do know now is how Aurora has approached this. And that is, we're not a rubber stamp to pass through federal dollars to just people who say they want to do things. I mean, one of the comments in this article, which was brilliant, was that it was like, listen, even Angela Lawson, who is, I think, a pretty moderate member of the board, she's kind of in that middle there. Even she was like, listen, I'm super concerned that we're having a ton of money go to organizations, the vast amount of which go to staff, and they haven't even set up the programs that they're saying they want to use the remaining amounts on. That seems to me to be like a basic entry-level thing if you're asking the government for money, and yet it's not happening. And now you guys are finally saying, hang on, we're either going to be people that just dole out money without care, or we're going to be good stewards of it. And I love that you're doing that.
Thank you. Well, and that is exactly right. I mean, there was one organization that was granted in round one of the nonprofit ARPA monies, were granted, I think it was $60,000. They have yet to start their program. So they came back asking for more money. It was like, you don't even have your program running yet. We don't have any results to look and see if it was beneficial.
Well, listen, I want to know how this stuff turns out in the future. I am perplexed that you have until 2026 to spend monies that were designed to fix an economic problem that is largely gone. But there it is. You're right. If you send it back to the government, it's going to go get spent on something else that has nothing to do with Aurora. You're right about that.
That's right. That's right.
And you can't control that. But from
and George, one of the things I
Yeah.
think that this showcases is this happens in every city and county in America, and there is no accountability really. And I think we budgets are tight. People have high inflation, are having to make sure that they spend their own household monies wisely. We need to do the same for our residents on behalf of them.
Is it too late for the George and Billy nonprofit to stick its hand out and get a little bit of that sweetness?
I don't know if you'll meet our criteria.
Well, not based on this discussion. Now I feel like we had no shot, but I will tell you that 100% of the funds would be spent on staffing. Because we would be the programming.
That's right.
Aurora City Councilwoman Françoise Bergan, thank you for coming on. We're going to have you on again. I love to hear the stuff that Aurora's doing. I think it is the way forward for most municipalities and counties. I hope they're taking the lesson.
Thank you so much, George. Appreciate it.
Talk to you soon. Bye now. Hey, listen, we're going to cut away for a break, but before we do, and we've got Don on the line. Don, I'd take you right now. I swear to you. But I have a guest, unexpected guest, that's going to come on at 9:25, and maybe when that segment is over, we can get back to the calls. But it's something that touches upon the topic that we had right before Councilwoman Bergan that we were talking about really all morning. And I think it's a fascinating conversation that I hope you'll stick around for. But we can't really get there yet until I tell you about a problem solver. And nope, it ain't going to be the juvenile justice system. This is a problem solver for you as a person with something called joint pain. And that's QC Kinetix. These are folks that have figured out a way to put out there a product, a regenerative medicine product that will keep you from having to undergo all the cutting and the stabbing and the rehab, the long rehab that takes place after surgical intervention to try to end your pain. That's kind of a big deal. Now, listen, go see the regular docs, right? And have them give you advice on what treatment there is. And many, many times it's, hey, we need to do invasive surgery into your shoulder or your knee or your hip or your ankle. Before you sign off on that, do yourself a favor and call the folks at QC Kinetix. Why? One, it doesn't cost you anything to have the conversation. And maybe, just maybe, you're going to end up deciding to go a different direction and you'll never need to go under the knife. How wonderful would that be to help solve your pain problem? Call QC Kinetix now. Free consultation with a local medical professional. 303-900-8986. 303-900-8986. And I'm just going to say it one more time because it matters that much. 303-900-8986. Call them if you're trying to alleviate pain without all the drugs and the surgery. The downtime is like nothing when you go through this process. Athletes use this stuff all the time. I mean, look at Patrick Mahomes. Remember that he had that high ankle sprain, and yet somehow he was able to continue to play quarterback in the AFC Championship and even scramble. That's the kind of procedure that QC Kinetix does as well. Be part of that process. Solve your pain problem with the least amount of invasive surgery. In fact, zero amount of invasive surgery possible. Call QC Kinetix. Hey, when we come back, we're going to be joined by a special guest here on the VIP line to have a conversation about all the stuff we've been talking about this morning with the juvenile crime, the rehabilitation, and all that stuff. It's George Brockler on The George Show, 710 KNUS.
Want to take your favorite radio station wherever you go? Well, now there's an app for that. No matter where you are, stream your favorite shows. Tap the app to listen to podcasts. Talk back to your favorite local hosts.
At the top.
Brock back with you here because run out, and that is a reflection of the fact that Billy and I continue to banter about our topics long after the radio show has ended. I apologize for that. I'm going to blame somebody who's not in the room to defend themselves. Geronimo. No, I'm kidding. He's I'm doing another show. George Brockler with you here. I want to go to the VIP line because it's so important to have this conversation. Wayne Thomas is someone who I got to know years ago, and texters have texted in. Wayne, you don't know this yet because you weren't listening to the show this morning. By the way, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, George.
We were having a conversation, Wayne, early on. There was a news story that Billy talked about at the top of one of the hours, and it was about a 14-year-old who'd participated in the Green Valley murder of 5 people, set fire to the house, and killed the Senegal family. Had you heard about that?
Yeah, I'm very familiar with that.
Yeah, and it really started a conversation about what do you do with juveniles who commit crimes, and some of the texts were, do you think the juvenile justice system can, or even the adult system can actually rehabilitate people? And some people were, as you can imagine, very eye for an eye, very adult time, adult crime, all that other stuff. And it made me instantly reflect back on you. Now, it's been some years since this has been a conversation piece in the media and all that stuff, but I really do think that your story is a compelling one, and I don't want to take any more time away from you in telling it, other than to say this: you were convicted as an adult when you were a juvenile. You were convicted as an adult for some serious crimes. You were sentenced to prison, and you have completely turned your life around and become really one of the outstanding members of the community. With just that background, Wayne, can you tell us the story?
Yeah. So when I was a juvenile, I was charged as an adult for aggravated robbery. That was the plea bargain. There was kidnapping and a handful of other charges involved. Got sentenced to 5 years, completed that 5 years, went to college after that. After I was done went to undergraduate. After my undergraduate, went to move on to get my master's degree, then ended up getting my doctorate degrees 12 years later, to the day after I got off parole.
Amazing.
And just kept pushing myself to be better. I think I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say that is the 30,000-foot view, but as you know, Wayne, the details are what really make your experience, I think, meaningful for folks that don't understand how it went. First off, let's get to the how you got there into the criminal justice system part. When you and I had a conversation in my office as district attorney, when you were seeking a pardon, and listen, I hate to be the spoiler for this, but you convinced me to advocate for a pardon for you, and you ultimately, towards the end of his administration, you ultimately were pardoned for those acts, right?
Correct.
When you sat in my office, and man, it was one of the most impactful meetings I had as district attorney, you started to tell me the story, and I asked you a bunch of questions, and you never said, hey, I'm not going to answer that. You never shined me on or anything. You were just very, very candid about it. So tell folks that are out there, what is it that led you into being in a position where this crime was committed? And I don't mean that specific act, but the things that you talked to me about were, listen, man, I played football, and when I played football, I was this kind of, but I had a single mom and who she was trying to work. And tell us about those things.
Yeah, I just grew up like any other typical kid in a single mother household. Didn't really have much resources available to me, and just was kind of like a lost soul. Didn't have really good guidance or direction, and so I made some bad decisions that cost me my freedom. I think where I made the pivot in life was that I had to grow up and take accountability for my actions, and I think that's where you and I were able to connect, and you were able to see that I actually went from a boy to a man.
You did. One of the things that still sticks with me, and I can't remember what year we had this conversation, man, but was that you had said, listen, I was a football player. I love playing football. When I was playing football, I was a good kid. I didn't get into trouble. Yep. But when football ended and having mom not in the house and working all the time, I'm starting to run the streets with guys who just are making bad decisions, and I'm right there with them making those bad decisions. That was one thing you told me. The other thing was you said, listen, when you would get into trouble at school, they'd call your mom, and your mom would come out and they'd tell her what happened. And your mom would, say, oh, I'm definitely going to take care of this. I'll just learn. But she still had a job to do. So what would she do?
Yep. She would just drop me off back at home. and go back to work. And then I would just go back outside and do what I was doing.
And you end up making these decisions. And I think when folks hear words like aggravated robbery and kidnapping, their mind pictures something that is way more than what you did and what you ended up doing. And if I describe this wrong, Wayne, please correct me. But there was a guy who had a friend of yours who'd had his house tossed by the police. And there was some conclusion that this other guy had dimed him out for, I don't know, having drugs or something like that.
That is correct.
And you guys went and found him, moved him from the front stoop of his house to like the side or the back. That's the kidnapping. And then threatened him with a gun and took his cell phone. And that becomes the aggravated robbery. Is that about right?
Yeah, but he was also assaulted with that gun as well. So there was assault in part of that.
So you end up getting charged. And in the old version of my DA's office, way before I was the DA, that office tried to crush you with charges, with charges that had you been convicted of them, man, you'd still be in prison, wouldn't you?
Right. I was facing 16 to 48 years.
Jesus. But then they offered you a plea bargain. And, you know, one of the things you did in jail that you told me about was you said, listen, I'm talking to the public defender, whoever the attorney was. And they said, hey, man, go get your GED so that you can prove all this other stuff. And you said you did it, but it really had no impact on you. Like this wasn't the thing that opened your eyes to that transition from boyhood to manhood.
Right. During the time when I was going through trial and stuff through the county, I thought, getting my GED would show them that I'm trying to change my life, and that had no bearing on it at all. They're like, good job.
Yeah,
so,
they didn't care.
So with that being said, I got sentenced, and then after being sentenced, I had ended up working on my high school diploma while I was in there, and then completing that. And then after my high school diploma, I kind of just sat around. I had to complete like a number of classes like anger management, victim awareness, life skills and preparation. I did all kinds of stuff that I had to do prior to getting released within that 5 years. And then after that, before I was released, I ended up one of the correctional officers asked me if I was interested in going to college. And if I was, he would help me go to school. So talked to the ward about me taking my ACT test. They let me go take my ACT test. The guards drove me to the high school in Pueblo, Colorado, South High School, I believe. They took me there to go take my ACT test, drove me back to the facility. I did very well. With that being said, I applied to go to school at University of Southern Colorado. When I applied, I got accepted before I was even discharged. So then I paroled to Pueblo, Colorado.
Now, listen, Wayne, you're way too humble. And frankly, you're not a dramatic speaker like this guy right here. So I want to go back and tell some of the cool things that you shared with me that you've just glossed over like they were nothing, because they're big, they're impactful. One of the things that you had said was, and you got sentenced to the youth offender system, which is not quite the same thing as DOC, but it serves the same function. Is that fair?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And in the youth offender system, you told me a couple things that were really impactful for me. And one was, you said you saw a bunch of dudes there that were guys that you had been running the streets with, and it really wasn't that bad to be in the youth offender system. Is that right?
Oh yeah, it was just like being back at home. I plugged right in.
And there was a moment, and I hope you'll remember this moment, because I love it when you tell it, but there's a moment at which, and I asked you this, when was that thing where all of a sudden you were like, wait a minute, I can be better than this. What was that moment? And I'll tell you what it was. I'll tease you with this. Your buddies would bring to you their mail. Why would they do that?
Yeah.
And
Yeah. So that moment was when I realized how much of an advantage that I had. I mean, my buddies that I was locked up with, they couldn't read, they couldn't write. And that was something that I thought only old people went through back in the 70s and 60s and stuff like that. Like, these were my peers that couldn't even read and write their own mail. And that's when I really realized that, I don't belong here.
Well, and that was the way you phrased it too, and it stuck with me. It was, I realized not that I'm better than them, but I'm better than this, and I can do better. And then, and you talked about it, but you didn't give it all the credit you should have, man, because it's such an impressive story. Then you really started to take advantage of all the opportunities that the juvenile system was offering. And the reason that's important is when people ask, can the youth offender system rehabilitate? It can, but it doesn't as much as it should. It's not that there aren't resources there, but there's some disconnect between the folks that are in there and those. But you figured out, man, I'm going to really apply myself. I'm going to do this. And then the amazing thing was you ended up doing so well that they ended up dressing out a guard or a prison guy in plain clothes to let you go out into the world and take the ACT. Man, that's amazing.
Correct.
I've never heard of that.
Yep. And the thing is, like, when it comes to anything in life, what I've learned, throughout my development is, like, you get what you put into life. So regardless of what the youthful offender system provides, like all the resources that we have, like all the classes that they made us take, if you're in there and you're not taking it seriously and you're not applying yourself and taking that opportunity to grow from it, you're not going to grow.
Wayne, to the extent that I'm not going to cost you your employment here, can you stick through a break and then I'll tell you exactly what I want to ask you about. There's another part of this conversation, and that is you get paroled, you get your degree, and then you have opportunities that you're trying to pursue. And really it is, and this is my opinion, this is me speaking, there's a grace of God moment there where people are telling you no and not interested because of your record. But then you have this incredible moment where somebody says, yes, we're going to do this. And it just helped you get to a place where you could take that next step. Can we have that conversation after a break?
Yeah, absolutely.
Wayne Thomas, everyone, this guy, if you have not checked him out, you can Google him. There's a ton of stories on him from years ago. 9 News did a great job. Anastasia Bolton. There's some stuff on there from the Denver Post and others. He has a compelling, incredible story, and it opened my eyes to the potential for the system that's out there. Wayne, thanks for staying on hold. Before I cut away for a break, though, I need to tell you about Gay Ribble. And Gay Ribble is with an awesome group called Empower Home. And in fact, I think it's now called the Reynolds Empower Home Team. What makes Gay and her team unique is not just that they've been there and done that, because they have. But when you're looking to jump into the should we sell our house, buy our house thing, right away as you even think about it, your blood pressure goes up because of the stress associated with, oh my God, how long is this going to take? Are we going to get our money out of the house, or are we going to make some money? Where are we going to go? Are we going to be able to buy a house for something we can afford? That would give me an ulcer, right? So there's someone out there that is like your lifeline for these kinds of decisions, and it's Gay Ribble with Empower Home. Gay is the person that puts your mind at ease. And she's such a sweet, nice person. I mean, her life has been all about trying to help families get better, whether it's through adoption or putting them into homes. If you want to work with a good person who just happens to be a subject matter expert, that's Gay Ribble. Now, they have these different programs. Some of them are awesome. Like, for instance, they have a free workshop called the Home Seller Workshop. It is easy to get to. Write this down, empowerhomefreeworkshops.com. So easy. Empowerhomefreeworkshops.com. They also have a program called Sold in 5. And when you go through the Sold in 5 program, you end up making more on average than other folks do, 6.1% more. In fact, on average, through every program they have, $30,000 more in your pocket than the average realtor out there in the market. How do you not want to be part of this? The Reynolds Home Empower team it's the best source for buying or selling your home. Check it out, 833-301-SOLD. That's the number you have to call, 833-301-SOLD, or gayhasthebuyers.com. That's gay, G-A-Y-E, hasthebuyers.com. When we come back, we're going to wrap up this hour with more of the story from Wayne Thomas. Stick around. This is just, for me, this is the sign for hope for the system. George Brockler on The George Show, 710 KNUS. George Brockler right back with you here on 710 KNUS. I want to have an uninterrupted conversation with Wayne about the rest of this story because it's a great one. So I'm going to do a little bit of business on the front end, and then I'm going to give the rest of the time to Wayne, our special guest on the VIP line. And that little bit of business is, as I always do at about this time, to remind you about something big that's happening. Yeah, it's Valentine's Day. It's coming up. It's less than 2 weeks away now. You have the time. Now you have the information to act on that time. Go to Littleton Jewelry. Go to Littleton Jewelry just south of Hudson Gardens on the west side of Santa Fe. Turn right at the jewelry repair sign. Walk right in there and say, I love someone. It's Valentine's Day. Help me do something special for them. And they're going to throw their arms around you, if you allow them, for the big old hug, because now you're going to be part of the family. You're part of the community. And they're going to show you all the wonderful things they do with the precious metals and the diamonds and the jewelry and the stones and the watches. And then they're going to say, you interested in custom jewelry because it is way more affordable than you think it is. And you go through that process and you're going to come away with that heirloom quality legacy type stuff that will show that special someone in your life. Listen, I know you're unique. I know I'm lucky. Here's just something to commemorate, just a little bit of it. And that's Littleton Jewelry. You can check them out at littletonfinejewelry.com. Great website, tool around there, but get in the car and drive over there. It's just so easy to get to. You take 470 north or take Hamden and hit south on Santa Fe. Turn in there after the jewelry repair sign. Tell Jesse and his team you said hi. They'll love to hear from you. They're 710 listeners as well. That's littletonfinejewelry.com. We're going to bring back up Wayne Thomas. Wayne, thanks for staying on with us.
You're welcome.
Now, listen, I wish I had an hour to give you because your story, I think we were, by the way, in my office for like an hour and a half or 2 hours telling this story. So it's hard to get it in, but
it was a while.
It was a long meeting, but meaningful. And I love it. You end up getting your degree. Your goal is you want to be an athletic trainer, and you try to start hooking up with high schools to be an athletic trainer, but you have to disclose in every one of those instances that you're a convicted felon at the time, which you're not anymore, a convicted felon at the time. And tell me about that process and then the break that you got.
So yeah, after I completed my degree and getting certified, so I had to go to the board, a certification, pass an exam like all other athletic trainers, which also required me to be assessed by a psychologist to make sure that I wasn't crazy. That was one of the stipulations to get certified to be an athletic trainer. I went through all that. As soon as I was done, I was applying for jobs here and there, and every time I get to the last part of the job, they're going to offer it to me, and then they're like, oh, we got to do our background check. They come back, oh, you can't work here, it's with kids, and so I was just defeated. And then one of my clinical rotations, which was in Jefferson County School District, they reached out to me. And at the time I was in between, because I was just finishing school, I got another job working concrete so I can get money until, I can find a job. I get a call from one of my clinical sites, and they were like, hey, we want you to come work for us. Are you interested? And because I was so defeated, I just told her blatantly over the phone. I was like, you know what? I'm a felon. This is what happened. I've been turned down every other job from here on for all the other jobs I applied for. And the lady said, you know what, Wayne, we worked with you as a student. We think you did a great job. We want you to come in for an interview.
Which school was that? Because that was in my old neighborhood.
So I went, when I first started working for Jefferson County, it was at Arvada West High School.
And I'm a Jeffco kid, and that's the Arvada West Wildcats. And so talk about that process. In fact, the interview part of this thing was just so compelling because they wanted you to come in right away. And you're like, wait, I am covered in concrete and sweat. And they are like, we don't care.
Yeah, they say just come down as you are. So as soon as I get there, I try to go to the bathroom and just wash my hands and wash my face the best way I can because I'm just covered in concrete. If anyone knows what that's like, you look like you got powder dust all over you. They ordered some pizza and we just had a conversation. And they offered me the job without any hesitation and said, hey, we liked what you did as a student. We think you'd be a great asset to our district. And they gave me the opportunity. And the rest was history.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that. What have you done since then? That one chance, that one opportunity that they didn't have to give and nobody else would give. They gave it. And man, you ran with it. Tell us what you did in the years after that and where you are today.
So yeah, since then I've done a handful of commencement speeches. I worked for some of the largest organizations in our state when it comes to healthcare. Worked for the largest private practice in our state, and now I'm in operations management for one of the largest plastic surgery organizations in the country.
Now, there's something else that you continue to do along the way, and that is the education piece.
Correct. As far as like to education piece to like other people, like speaking to other people, is that what you're saying?
That's important too, but I mean yourself, like you kept getting degrees.
Oh yeah. So after I finished my master's degree, I went ahead and pursued my doctorate degree.
Listen, it's ridiculous because the way you say it was like, oh yeah. There was the moment where you're finishing up your story in my office and you brought this tube in. And I don't know if you remember this, and it was all rolled up in there. I'm like, well, what the hell's that? And you're like, oh, and you pulled it out. It was your doctorate diploma. You know what I mean? Do you remember that? And I was like, what the what?
Yeah.
And one other part of this story, I just love this story, Wayne, and I love what you've done with your life, and it's proof that the system can work. It gives us hope. But there's a part of this thing that I told Billy off air, and you'll remember this too. In deciding whether or not to even take the interview and maybe even work with you towards getting a pardon, we had to contact the victim of the case. Do you remember this part of the story? So
I do. That was
I had a guy named
life-changing for me too.
Oh, buddy.
Yeah.
I had a guy named John Hauer who probably has more death penalty experience than any prosecutor in Colorado at the time. I had him review this, and he comes into me, and I'm going to do his voice. He goes, George, this is a remarkable story. I think we need to meet with Wayne. And I said, whoa, first off, talk to the victim. He comes and sees me a couple days later, goes, well, I found the victim. He is serving a 90-year sentence in Wyoming for killing his wife. And I'm like, what? And I said, well, we still got to reach out to him. He was a victim. He reaches out to him, comes back to me a couple days later. And by the way, the guy's he's in his jumpsuit. He has devil tattoos on his forehead. I mean, this guy looks rough. And when John talked to him, this is what he says. This is what I shared with you, Wayne. He says, oh, yeah. I remember that very well. He said, listen, I forgave Wayne a long time ago, and I hope someday people can forgive me for what I did. And I was just floored. I was like, what? And that was what I shared with you. And this whole thing, Wayne, is a testament not just to you as an individual, but to the opportunities that exist in a system that I think could be better. And I hope that you're continuing to talk to the folks on the inside, other people like you, young guys who got long sentences, and then going and telling them, there's hope, man. Don't give up. It's not one and done here. You can fix your life and you can get out of this mess. I hope you're still doing that.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of fizzed out because of COVID and everything.
Oh, yeah, I get it.
But I do still have contacts, and I actually had some recent people reach out to me seeing if I was interested in going back out. So hopefully that stuff changes here in the summer and I can start getting back out and making my rounds.
Well, listen, this is going to sound silly. I'm proud of what you've done, not in a fatherly or brotherly way, but just as a citizen. Like you've overcome so much. I'd love to have you back on the show to talk about the great things you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime, George. I appreciate you as well.
Thanks, man. Hang in there. That was Wayne Thomas, superstar. Listen, that does it for the show today. We'll be back tomorrow, the last day of the week, so you know it's going to be something crazy, especially when Billy's involved. Stick around. It's George Brockler on The George Show, 710 KNUS.